In fog-draped London, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson unravel a chilling conspiracy threatening to topple Parliament. A cryptic cipher leads them to the Order of the Lion, a secret brotherhood wielding blackmail and murder to control the government. From hidden passages in Westminster to shadowy docks on the Thames, they chase the elusive architect, only to uncover a deeper mastermind, Der Adler, plotting chaos across Europe. Racing against time, Holmes exposes traitors in Whitehall and foils a Vienna summit sabotage. But the lion's roar echoes on, promising a relentless battle against an enemy that never sleeps. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Cipher. The fog hung low over London, wrapping Baker Street in a thick, gray blanket. It was a cold evening in late autumn, and the gas lamps flickered like tired eyes struggling to stay awake. Inside 221B, a fire crackled, in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled under his chin, staring into the flames. His sharp eyes, usually alive with thought, were restless, darting to the window as if expecting something or someone. Dr. John Watson, his loyal friend, sat across from him, scribbling in a notebook. The scratch of his pen was the only sound besides the fire's soft pops. Watson glanced up, noticing Holmes's unease. "You've been quiet all day, Holmes," he said, setting his pen down. "What's troubling you?" Holmes didn't answer, right away. His gaze flicked to the table where a pile of newspapers lay in a messy heap. "Boredom, Watson," he said at last, his voice low and sharp. "The mind grows dull without a puzzle to chew on. London's criminals have grown lazy, and I'm left with nothing but trivialities." Watson chuckled. "You call them trivialities, but last week you solved a theft in under an hour. The police were baffled, yet you made it look easy." "Easy," Holmes muttered, waving a hand. "That's the problem. A stolen necklace, a cheating merchant. Child's play. I need something to test me, Watson. Something to make the blood race." As if on cue, a sharp knock echoed from the door downstairs. Holmes's eyes snapped to the sound, a spark of interest, flaring. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps shuffled below, followed by muffled voices. Moments later she appeared at the door, her face pinched with worry. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman here. Says it's urgent. He looks, well, rather shaken." "Show him in," Holmes said, sitting up straighter. His boredom vanished like smoke. A man stepped into the room, his coat damp from the fog. He was young, perhaps 30, with a pale face and wide, nervous eyes. His hands clutched a small, crumpled envelope, and his hat was askew, as if he'd run the whole way. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm in desperate need of your help. My name is Edward Grayson, clerk to Mr. Charles Whitmore, Member of Parliament." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Grayson like a hawk spotting prey. "Sit, Mr. Grayson. Calm yourself and tell me everything." Grayson sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he held out the envelope. "This came to my employer's office today. It's not normal, sir. I've never seen anything like it, and Mr. Whitmore is beside himself. He sent me to find you at once." Holmes took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. It was plain, with no name or address, only a wax seal stamped with a strange symbol, a circle with a jagged line through it, like a broken clock. He opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Watson leaned closer, peering over his shoulder. The paper was covered in odd symbols, not letters or numbers, but a jumble of lines, dots, and curves. It looked like no language Watson had ever seen. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a single sentence: "The heart of power will bleed by the next moon." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Now this," he said softly, "is interesting." Watson frowned. "What is it, Holmes? Some kind of code?" "A cipher, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. "A very clever one, if I'm not mistaken. And this message—" He tapped the sentence at the bottom. "A threat, and a bold one. The heart of power can only mean Parliament itself. The next moon is in 3 days." Grayson nodded, his face pale. That's what Mr. Whitmore fears, sir. He thinks someone's plotting something terrible. He's been nervous for weeks. Meetings at odd hours, whispers in the corridors, and now this. Holmes's fingers traced the symbols, his mind already racing. Tell me, Mr. Grayson, what does your employer do in Parliament? Any enemies, any recent troubles? Grayson hesitated, glancing at Watson as if unsure how much to say. Mr. Whitmore is on the Finance Committee. He's been pushing for new laws, taxes, trade rules, that sort of thing. Not everyone likes it. Some say he's stepping on powerful toes. Powerful toes, Holmes repeated, his voice thoughtful. And these meetings you mentioned, who attends them? I don't always know, sir, Grayson admitted. They're private, held late at night. But I've seen men come and go, some in fine suits, others less so. One had a scar across his cheek like a knife wound. I didn't like the look of him. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A scar, you say? Interesting. And this envelope? How did it arrive? By messenger this morning, Grayson said. A boy dropped it at the office. No note, no explanation, just that seal and the paper inside. Holmes stood, pacing the room with the paper in hand. Watson, fetch my cipher books from the shelf. The ones on cryptography. And you, Mr. Grayson, tell me more about this scar-faced man. Every detail, no matter how small. Grayson swallowed hard, his hands twisting together. I only saw him once, sir, about a week ago. He came to Mr. Whitmore's office after dark. Tall, thin, with a limp. His coat was dark, and he kept his hat low, but that scar, it was hard to miss. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. I couldn't hear much, but Mr. Whitmore looked frightened when he left. Holmes stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on the cipher. A limp, a scar, and secret meetings. We have a puzzle, Watson, and I suspect it's a dangerous one. He turned to Grayson. Does Mr. Whitmore know you're here? Yes, sir, Grayson said. He told me to come straight to you. He's staying at his office tonight going through papers. He thinks the cipher might be connected to a vote in Parliament tomorrow. Holmes nodded, his mind clearly elsewhere. Very well. Return to Mr. Whitmore and tell him to lock his doors. Trust no one until I arrive. Watson, grab your coat. We're going to Westminster. Watson blinked. Now? It's nearly 10 o'clock, Holmes. The fog's thicker than soup. Exactly, Holmes said, a glint in his eye. The perfect time for secrets to hide. Come, Watson. The game is afoot. The two men bundled into their coats, Holmes tucking the cipher into his pocket. Grayson hurried out ahead, his footsteps fading into the foggy street. As they stepped outside, the cold air bit at Watson's face and the world seemed to vanish beyond a few feet. The gas lamps were faint glows, like stars in a cloudy sky. Holmes moved quickly, his long legs striding through the fog. Watson struggled to keep up, his mind buzzing with questions. Holmes, what do you make of it? That cipher, it's like nothing I've seen before. It's a substitution cipher, Watson, Holmes said without slowing. Each symbol stands for a letter or number, but the key is unique. The pattern suggests a polybius square, perhaps layered with a transposition. I'll need time to crack it, but the thread is clear. Someone means to strike at Parliament, and soon. Watson's heart sank. Parliament? That's treason, Holmes. Who would dare? Someone bold, Holmes said, his voice sharp. Or desperate. The scar-faced man is our first clue. A limp suggests an injury, perhaps from a fight or an accident. His presence at a late-night meeting with an MP is no coincidence. We must find him. They reached Westminster after a tense cab ride, the fog making the journey feel like a plunge into a dream. The Palace of Westminster loomed ahead, its towers half hidden in the mist. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional clop of a horse or the distant shout of a watchman. At Whitmore's office, a small light glowed in the window. Holmes knocked sharply, and the door creaked open. Charles Whitmore stood there, a doughy, stout man with graying hair and a face lined with worry. Mr. Holmes, he said, his voice hoarse. Thank God you're here. Did Grayson tell you about the letter? He did, Holmes said, stepping inside. The office was cluttered with papers, books, and maps. the air heavy with cigar smoke. "Show me where you received it." Whitmore pointed to a desk where an ink blotter and a few pens lay scattered. "It was right there this morning. Grayson found it first. I haven't touched it since." Holmes examined the desk, his eyes scanning every detail. He picked up a small scrap of paper, sniffing it briefly. "Cheap ink," he muttered, "and a faint trace of tobacco. Not yours, Mr. Whitmore. Something stronger, foreign, Turkish, perhaps." Whitmore's eyes widened. "You can tell that from a scrap?" "I can tell many things," Holmes said, his tone clipped. "Now tell me about these late-night meetings. Who else was involved?" Whitmore hesitated, his hands fidgeting. I can't say much. They're private, you understand. Matters of state. But there have been disagreements. Strong ones. Some in the committee don't like my proposals. They say I'm stirring trouble." "Trouble," Holmes repeated, his eyes narrowing. "And this scar-faced man Grayson mentioned?" Whitmore paled. "I don't know his name. He came once with another man, a lord, I think. They spoke in whispers, and I didn't like their tone. They left quickly when they saw Grayson." Holmes's lips pressed into a thin line. A lord and a scarred stranger. Interesting company for a clerk's office. "Watson, take note of this. We'll need to dig into Whitmore's committee. Every member, every vote." Watson nodded, pulling out his notebook. As he scribbled, Holmes paced the room, his eyes darting from the desk to the windows to the locked cabinet in the corner. "This cipher," he said, pulling the paper from his pocket, "is the key. If we can crack it, we'll know what they're planning and who they are." Whitmore wrung his hands. "Do you think it's serious, Mr. Holmes? This threat?" Holmes stopped, his gaze piercing. "As serious as a noose, Mr. Whitmore. Someone is playing a dangerous game, and Parliament is the board. Stay here, lock the door, and speak to no one until I return." They left the office, stepping back into the fog. Watson's mind raced, trying to piece together the clues. "Holmes, this feels bigger than a single threat. A cipher, secret meetings, a scarred man, it's like a spider's web." "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low. "And we've only touched the first strand. Come, Watson. The night is young, and London's secrets are waiting." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the cipher on the table, his books on cryptography piled around him. The fire had died down, but the room felt alive with his energy. He worked in silence, his pen scratching as he tested patterns and keys. Watson watched, marveling at the speed of his friend's mind. Hours passed, the clock ticking toward midnight. Finally, Holmes leaned back, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Got it," he said, holding up the paper. "It's a double-layered cipher, a Polybius square with a keyword shift. The message reads, 'Strike at the vote, the crown falls.'" Watson's breath caught. "The vote? Tomorrow's session?" Holmes nodded, his face grim. "Someone plans to disrupt Parliament's vote, perhaps with violence. The crown could be a metaphor, or something more literal. We need to know more about Whitmore's enemies." Watson rubbed his eyes, the weight of it sinking in. "Holmes, this could be huge. Treason, sabotage. How do we stop it?" Holmes stood, grabbing his coat. "By moving faster than they do. Tomorrow we'll be at Parliament before the session begins. I want to see every face, hear every whisper. If there's a plot, we'll find it." As they prepared to leave, Watson glanced at the cipher, its symbols now a solved puzzle. But he knew this was only the beginning. The fog outside seemed thicker, the night darker. Somewhere in London, a scarred man and his allies were moving, and Holmes was ready to hunt them down. Chapter 2. A Call to Westminster. The morning broke over London with a reluctant sun, its light struggling through the fog that still clung to the city like a stubborn ghost. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their Baker Street lodgings, the air sharp with the bite of autumn. Holmes's face was set, his eyes gleaming with purpose, while Watson clutched his coat against the chill, his mind buzzing with the weight of the previous night's discovery. They hailed a hansom cab the horses' hooves clattering on the cobblestones as they sped toward Westminster. The cipher's decoded message, "Strike at the vote, the crown falls," echoed in Watson's head. He glanced at Holmes, who sat silent, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his knee. "Holmes," Watson said, breaking the quiet, "do you really think someone's planning an attack today? In Parliament, of all places." Holmes's gaze flicked to the passing streets, half hidden in mist. "Not an attack in the crude sense, Watson. No bombs or gunfire, not yet. This is subtler, a vote disrupted, a scandal sparked, or a key figure silenced. The crown suggests power, perhaps the government itself. We're dealing with someone who plays with words as much as deeds." The cab rattled to a stop near the Palace of Westminster, its Gothic spires piercing the fog like jagged teeth. The square was alive with activity, carriages unloading MPs, clerks scurrying with papers, and policemen patrolling with watchful eyes. Holmes stepped out, his sharp gaze sweeping the crowd. "Keep your eyes open, Watson," he said. "Our scar-faced man may be here, or his allies. Note anyone who seems out of place." They entered the grand halls of Parliament, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and old leather. Voices echoed, MPs debating, laughing, or whispering, in corners. Holmes moved like a shadow, his eyes darting from face to face, cataloging every detail. Watson followed, feeling the weight of their task. The cipher had pointed to today's vote, but what kind? And who was behind it? They reached Charles Whitmore's office, where the MP was already waiting, his face pale and his hands fidgeting. "Mr. Holmes," he said, rising from his chair, "I barely slept. That message, it's haunted me all night. The vote today is on a new trade bill. It stirred up trouble, but I never thought it would come to this." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "Tell me about the bill, Mr. Whitmore. Who opposes it, and why?" Whitmore mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "It's about tariffs, taxes on imports. Some say it'll hurt their businesses, especially the shipping trade. Others think it's too soft, letting foreign goods flood the market. The debates have been fierce. Lord Harrington, for one, has been vocal against it." "Lord Harrington," Holmes repeated, his voice low. "The same lord who met with the scar-faced man?" Whitmore froze, his eyes wide. I didn't say that. I don't know who that man was. I only said a lord was present." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You didn't need to say it, Mr. Whitmore. Your hesitation speaks volumes. Now, where can we find Lord Harrington?" "He'll be in the House of Lords preparing for the session," Whitmore said, his voice trembling. "But be careful, Mr. Holmes. He's powerful, with friends in high places. Power makes enemies as well as friends," Holmes said, turning to the door. "Come, Watson, we have a lord to meet." They navigated the maze of corridors, the walls lined with portraits of stern-faced men in wigs. The House of Lords was a grand chamber, its high ceilings and red leather benches heavy with history. Lords milled about, their voices a low hum of discussion. Holmes's eyes locked onto a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a commanding presence, Lord Harrington. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes murmured, "and watch his hands. They'll tell us more than his words." They approached, and Harrington turned, his sharp blue eyes sizing them up. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume?" he said, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "I've heard of you. What brings you to Westminster?" "A matter of urgency, my lord," Holmes said, his tone polite but firm. "We're investigating a threat to today's vote. A cipher delivered to Mr. Whitmore suggests danger." Harrington's face remained calm, but Watson noticed his fingers tighten briefly on his cane. "A cipher?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a prank. Parliament is no stranger to empty threats." "Perhaps," Holmes said, his eyes never leaving Harrington's. "But this one mentions the crown falling. Curious, don't?" "You think for a mere prank?" Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Curious, yes, but I'm afraid I know nothing of ciphers or threats. My focus is the trade bill. It's a bad piece of work, and I'll see it voted down." Holmes tilted his head, studying the lord like a specimen under a lens. "You oppose Mr. Whitmore's bill. Any reason someone might wish to disrupt the vote beyond debate?" Harrington's jaw tightened, just for a moment. Politics is a rough game, Mr. Holmes. Men disagree, tempers flare. But threats? That's not my style. Of course, Holmes said, his voice smooth as silk. One last question, my lord. Have you met a man with a scar across his cheek, perhaps in a late-night meeting? Harrington's face didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on his cane. I meet many people, he said coolly. I don't recall faces or scars. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a session to prepare for. He turned and walked away, his cane tapping the floor. Watson leaned close to Holmes. He's hiding something, he whispered. Did you see his hand? I saw everything, Holmes said, his eyes still on Harrington's retreating figure. He's involved, Watson, but he's not the mastermind. His reaction was too controlled, too practiced. We need to know who he's protecting. They left the chamber, stepping into a quieter corridor. Holmes paused, his mind working. The vote is in 2 hours, he said. We need to observe the chamber, the MPs, the lords, everyone. If there's a plot, it'll show itself in small ways. A glance, a whisper, a nervous tick. Watson nodded, though his stomach churned. Holmes, if this is as big as you think, how do we stop it? We don't even know what strike at the vote means. Holmes's eyes gleamed. We watch, Watson. We listen. And we trust the clues. The scar-faced man is our link. If we find him, we find the heart of this. They took positions near the entrance to the Commons, where MPs were gathering. The air was thick with tension, voices rising and falling as the vote loomed. Holmes stood like a statue, his eyes scanning every face, every movement. Watson tried to mimic him, but the crowd was a blur. Men in suits, clerks with papers, a few women in dark dresses, likely secretaries. Then Watson saw it. A flicker of movement near a side door. A tall, thin man in a dark coat, his hat pulled low. He limped slightly, and as he turned, the light caught a jagged scar across his cheek. Watson's heart jumped. Holmes, he hissed, nudging his friend. There, by the door. Holmes's gaze snapped to the man who was already slipping into the crowd. Well done, Watson, he said, moving forward. Stay close, but don't let him see us. They followed, weaving through the throng. The man moved quickly despite his limp, heading toward a staircase that led to the upper galleries. Holmes's pace was relentless, his eyes locked on their target. The man glanced back once, his scar stark against his pale skin, then vanished around a corner. Holmes and Watson reached the corner, but the man was gone. The corridor was empty, save for a single door at the far end, slightly ajar. Holmes approached it, his hand on his stick, ready for trouble. He pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase winding upward. Careful, Watson, Holmes said, his voice low. He knows we're here. They climbed the stairs, the air growing colder and the sounds of the Commons fading below. At the top was a small room, likely a storage space, filled with crates and old furniture. The scar-faced man stood in the center, his back to them, a knife glinting in his hand. Mr. Holmes, the man said without turning, his voice rough as gravel. You're quicker than I expected. Holmes stepped forward, his posture calm but alert. And you're bolder than most, showing yourself so openly. Who are you and what's your part in this plot? The man turned, his scar twisting as he smirked. Plot? You're chasing shadows, detective. I'm just a messenger. Then deliver your message, Holmes said, his eyes cold. Who sent? The cipher? What's planned for the vote? The man laughed, a harsh sound. You think I'd tell you? You're clever, Holmes, but you're not the only one playing this game. He lunged suddenly, his knife flashing toward Holmes. Watson moved without thinking, shoving Holmes aside and grabbing the man's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor, and Holmes was on the man in an instant, pinning him against a crate. Talk, Holmes snapped, his voice like steel. Or you'll find Newgate far less pleasant than this room. The man struggled, but Holmes's grip was iron. You're too late, he spat. The vote will fall, and so will your precious crown. You can't stop it. Holmes's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. He bound the man's hands with a cord from his pocket, his movements swift and precise. Watson, fetch a constable. This gentleman has much to explain. As Watson hurried down the stairs, his heart pounded. The scar-faced man was caught, but his words echoed in Watson's mind. Too late. The vote was minutes away, and the threat was still unclear. Holmes was right. This was a web, and they were only beginning to untangle it. Back in the storage room, Holmes stood over the man, his mind racing. The cipher, the vote, the scar-faced man, Lord Harrington, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the full picture was still hidden. As the distant bell rang, signaling the start of the session, Holmes knew one thing. Time was running out, and the heart of Parliament was in danger. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Commons. The air in the Palace of Westminster was thick with anticipation as the bell's echo faded, signaling the start of the session. Sherlock Holmes stood in the cramped storage room, his eyes fixed on the scar-faced man now bound and slumped against a crate. The man's smirk had faded, but his silence was stubborn, his lips pressed tight against Holmes's questions. Watson returned, breathless, with a constable in tow, a burly man with a red face and a notebook clutched in his hand. "Take him to Scotland Yard," Holmes instructed the constable, his voice sharp. "Hold him for questioning, but don't let him speak to anyone else. He's part of something bigger." The constable nodded, hauling the scar-faced man to his feet. As they shuffled out, the man shot Holmes a final glance, his eyes glinting with defiance. "You're chasing the wrong shadow, Holmes," he muttered. "The real one's already moving." Holmes's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his mind already racing ahead. He turned to Watson, his coat swirling as he moved toward the door. "Come, Watson. The vote is beginning, and we need to be in the Commons. If there's a strike, it'll happen there." They hurried through the winding corridors, the hum of voices growing louder as they neared the House of Commons. The chamber was a sea of dark suits and heated words, MPs crowding the benches, their faces a mix of boredom, anger, and nerves. The speaker's voice boomed, calling for order as the trade bill was announced. Holmes slipped into the public gallery, Watson close behind, their eyes scanning the room like hawks. "Look for anything odd," Holmes whispered. A glance, a signal, someone out of place. The scar-faced man was a pawn, but his masters are here. Watson nodded, his heart pounding. The chamber was alive with movement, MPs shifting in their seats, clerks passing notes, and a few lords watching from the edges. He tried to spot anything unusual, but the crowd was overwhelming. "Holmes, it's like finding a needle in a haystack," he muttered. "Then we sharpen our eyes," Holmes replied, his gaze darting from one face to another. He leaned forward, his fingers gripping the rail. "There, third bench, left side." The man in the gray suit fidgeting with his watch. Watson followed Holmes's gaze. The man was young, with a pinched face and darting eyes. He kept glancing at the door, his fingers twisting the watch chain as if counting seconds. "He looks nervous," Watson said. "Could he be part of it?" "Possibly," Holmes said. "But nervousness alone proves nothing. Keep watching." The debate droned on, voices rising and falling over tariffs and trade. Charles Whitmore stood to speak, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. He argued for the bill, his words met with murmurs of approval and sharp jeers. Holmes's eyes never left the crowd, cataloging every reaction. Then it happened. A small gesture, almost missed. A man in the back row, older with a neat beard and a dark waistcoat, slipped a folded paper to the nervous man with the watch. The exchange was quick, hidden by a cough and a shift in posture. Watson caught it only because he was watching the younger man. "Holmes," he hissed, nudging his friend. "Did you see that?" Holmes's eyes flicked to the pair, his expression unreadable. "Well spotted, Watson." The bearded man, note his posture, his clothes. Expensive, tailored, but his boots are scuffed. A man of means, fallen on hard times. And the paper. We need to know what's on it. The session continued, the vote drawing closer. Holmes leaned closer to Watson, his voice low. "We can't approach them here, too many eyes. But we'll follow the bearded man when he leaves. He's the key." As the speaker called for the vote, the chamber erupted into controlled chaos, MPs shouting, papers rustling, and the nervous man with the watch slipping out a side door. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He's moving. Stay here, Watson. Watch the bearded man. I'll follow our nervous friend. Before Watson could protest, Holmes was gone, blending into the crowd like a shadow. Watson turned his attention to the bearded man who remained seated, his face calm but his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on his knee. The vote was counted, the bill passing by a narrow margin. Cheers and groans filled the room, but the bearded man showed no reaction, his eyes fixed on the door where the nervous man had vanished. Watson's mind raced. Was the bearded man waiting for a signal? Or was he simply another piece in this puzzle? He scribbled notes in his pocketbook, trying to mimic Holmes's precision. The man's scuffed boots, his tailored suit, the way he'd passed the note. It all felt deliberate, planned. The session ended, and the bearded man rose, moving toward the exit with a casual stride. Watson followed at a distance, his heart thudding. The corridors were crowded, MPs and clerks jostling past, but Watson kept his eyes on the man's dark waistcoat. He turned a corner, heading toward a quieter wing of the palace, where the gas lamps cast long shadows. Watson hesitated, glancing back for Holmes, but his friend was nowhere in sight. He pressed on, his steps careful. The bearded man stopped at a heavy oak door, glanced around, then slipped inside. Watson waited a moment, then approached, pressing his ear to the door. Muffled voices came from within, low, urgent, and too faint to make out. He debated knocking, but thought better of it. If this was part of the plot, he couldn't risk alerting them. Instead, he memorized the door's location. Room 17, a small, brass plaque read, and turned back to find Holmes. He found his friend near the main entrance, his face grim. "The nervous man gave me the slip," Holmes said, his voice tight. "He knew I was following and vanished into the crowd. Clever, but not clever enough. Did you see anything?" Watson recounted the bearded man's actions, the note, and the door to room 17. Holmes's eyes lit up. "Excellent, Watson. That room is likely a private office or meeting space. We need to know who uses it and what they're planning." They returned to the corridor, but the door to room 17 was now locked, the voices gone. Holmes knelt, examining the lock with a small tool from his pocket. "Fresh scratches," he murmured. "Someone's been here recently, and they're not keen on visitors." Watson glanced around the empty corridor, feeling eerie in the dim light. "Holmes, what if the vote wasn't the target? What if it was a distraction?" Holmes stood, his eyes narrowing. "A distraction? Possible. The cipher said strike at the vote, but it didn't specify how. The vote passed, yet the scar-faced man said we were too late. Something else is in motion." They searched the corridor for clues, Holmes's sharp eyes catching details. Watson missed. A scuff on the floor, a faint smell of cigar smoke, a crumpled bit of paper tucked behind a radiator. Holmes unfolded it carefully, revealing a hastily scrawled note. "Meet at the Lion's Head midnight, bring the list." "The Lion's Head," Watson said, frowning. "That's a pub in Southwark, isn't it? Rough place." "Indeed," Holmes said, pocketing the note. "And a perfect spot for secrets. We'll be there at midnight, Watson, but first we need to know more about room 17 and our bearded friend." They returned to Whitmore's office, finding the MP still shaken but relieved the vote had passed. "Did you find anything?" Whitmore asked, his eyes darting between them. "Enough to keep us busy," Holmes said, his tone clipped. "Who uses room 17 in the East Wing?" Whitmore frowned, thinking. "It's a shared office, mostly for clerks and minor officials. But I've seen Lord Harrington there once or twice, meeting with, well, I don't know who." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Harrington again, and this list mentioned in a note. Any idea what it might be?" Whitmore shook his head. "No, but there's been talk of a ledger. Names, debts, favors owed. It's a rumor, nothing more. Politics runs on such things, you know." "Rumors often hide truths," Holmes said. "Stay here, Mr. Whitmore. Lock your door. We'll return. Tomorrow." As they stepped back into the fog, Watson felt the weight of the day pressing on him. "Holmes, this is getting bigger. A cipher, a scarred man, a bearded stranger, and now a list. What are we walking into?" "A conspiracy, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and fierce. one that reaches into the heart of power. The lion's head at midnight will give us answers or more questions. Either way, we're closing in. The fog swallowed their footsteps as they headed toward Southwark, the night stretching ahead like a dark promise. The shadows in the commons were moving, and Holmes was determined to catch them before they struck again. Chapter 4. The MP's Disappearance. The fog had thickened as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way to Southwark, the gas lamps casting weak halos in the murky night. The Lion's Head pub lay ahead, its grimy windows glowing faintly through the mist. The air smelled of damp coal and stale beer, and the distant clatter of a cart echoed in the quiet streets. Holmes's face was set, his eyes sharp with focus, while Watson's stomach knotted with unease. The note: meet at the Lion's Head midnight. Bring the list was their only lead, but it felt like stepping into a trap. They reached the pub just before midnight, its sign creaking above the door. The Lion's Head was a rough place, frequented by dock workers and petty thieves, its walls stained with years of smoke and spilled ale. Holmes paused outside, his gaze sweeping the street. "Stay sharp, Watson," he murmured. "Our bearded man may not be alone." Inside, the pub was a haze of noise and shadows. Men hunched over tables, their voices low, while a barmaid darted, between them balancing mugs. Holmes and Watson found a corner table half hidden by a sagging curtain. Holmes's eyes scanned the room, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "He's not here yet," he said. "But he will be. Watch the door." Watson nodded, his hand resting near the revolver in his coat pocket. The minutes ticked by, the pub's clamor a dull roar in his ears. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, the door swung open and the bearded man from the common stepped in. His tailored suit looked out of place among the rough crowd, but his scuffed boots blended with the dirty floor. He carried a small, leather case clutching it tightly. "There," Watson whispered, nudging Holmes. "That's him." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And he's nervous. See how he grips that case? Whatever's inside is important. Wait here." Before Watson could protest, Holmes slipped through the crowd, moving like a ghost. The bearded man sat at a table near the back, glancing around as if expecting someone. Holmes lingered nearby, pretending to study a cracked mirror on the wall. Watson watched, his heart pounding as the bearded man opened the case and pulled out a folded paper, likely the list. A second man joined him, short and stocky, with a flat cap pulled low. His face was half hidden, but his movements were quick, jittery. They spoke in low tones, the bearded man sliding the paper across the table. The stocky man nodded, tucking it into his coat. Holmes edged closer, his ear tilted toward them, but the pub's noise drowned out their words. Suddenly, the stocky man stood, his chair scraping loudly. He hurried toward the back door, vanishing into the night. The bearded man lingered, draining. His glass then followed, leaving the leather case behind. Holmes moved swiftly, snatching the case before anyone noticed. He returned to Watson, his face grim. "Empty," Holmes said, opening the case to reveal nothing but a torn lining. "The list was the prize, and it's gone. But this case, cheap, leather, foreign stitching, not English. We're dealing with more than local trouble." Watson frowned. "Did you hear anything they said?" "Fragments," Holmes said. "Something about the vote was only the start and Whitmore must be silenced. We need to get back to Westminster, now." They left the pub, the fog swallowing them as they hailed a cab. Watson's mind raced. "Silenced? You don't think they mean to harm Whitmore, do you?" Holmes's eyes were dark. "I think they mean to remove him one way or another. We underestimated the speed of this plot, Watson. The vote was a feint, a way to draw eyes while they moved on their real target." The cab rattled through the foggy streets, the city a blur of shadows. When they reached Westminster, the palace was quiet, its grand halls empty save for a few night watchmen. They hurried to Whitmore's office, but the door was ajar, the lock scratched and broken. Holmes pushed it open, his hand on his stick. The room was a wreck, papers scattered, Drawers yanked open, a chair overturned. Whitmore was gone. A single sheet of paper lay on the desk, pinned under a heavy inkwell. Holmes snatched it up, his eyes scanning the scrawled words. You were warned. The crown falls next. Watson's heart sank. They've taken him, Holmes. We're too late. Holmes's jaw tightened, his fingers tracing the paper's edge. Not too late, Watson. Not yet. Look. Ink smudges still wet. This was written minutes ago. They can't have gone far. He knelt, examining the floor. Mud here fresh with a distinct tread, heavy boots, not Whitmore's. And this, he picked up a small brass button engraved with a tiny lion's head. From the pub, perhaps. Our bearded man or his friend. Watson's mind spun. Where would they take him, and why? To silence him, Holmes said, standing. Whitmore knows something. About the list, the plot, or both. They'll want him out of the way before he talks. We need to find that stocky man from the pub. He has the list, and likely Whitmore. They searched the office for more clues. Holmes found a hidden drawer in the desk, its lock pried open. Inside was a single letter, addressed to Whitmore from an unknown sender. It read, Beware the lion's shadow. Trust no one in the committee. The signature was a single initial, R. Holmes pocketed the letter, his eyes blazing. The lion again. This is no coincidence. The lion's head, the button, the warning. It's a thread, Watson. We follow it. They left the office, moving quickly through the silent corridors. Holmes's mind was a machine, piecing together fragments. The stocky man moved toward Southwark's docks, he said. A likely spot for a hideout. Warehouses, alleys, easy to disappear. We'll start there. The docks were a maze of crates and shadows, the Thames lapping darkly against the wharves. The fog was thicker here, muffling sounds and hiding danger. Holmes led the way, his steps silent, his eyes scanning every corner. Watson gripped his revolver, the weight reassuring in his hand. They paused near a cluster of warehouses, their windows dark. A faint light flickered in one high up like a candle behind a curtain. Holmes pointed. There. Quietly, Watson. They crept closer, the air heavy with the smell of tar and fish. A low murmur came from inside, voices tense and hurried. Holmes pressed himself against the wall, peering through a cracked window. Inside, Whitmore sat tied to a chair, his face bruised but alive. The stocky man from the pub stood over him, the folded list in his hand, while the bearded man paced, nearby. We can't keep him here long, the bearded man said, his voice sharp. Harrington wants it done by dawn. The stocky man snorted. Harrington's not the one taking risks. This list is worth more than Whitmore's life. We deliver it. We're set. Holmes signaled Watson to stay low. We need that list, he whispered. And Whitmore. Wait for my move. Before Watson could respond, a third figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, tall and cloaked, her face hidden by a hood. She spoke in a low, commanding voice. Enough talk. Get the names. From him? Then finish it. The plan moves forward. Watson's breath caught. A woman in the plot? Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing. The woman turned, her cloak brushing the floor, and Watson caught a glimpse of a silver brooch. A lion's head, identical to the button. Holmes moved like lightning, kicking the door open and lunging at the stocky man. Watson followed, his revolver raised. Hands up, he shouted, his voice echoing in the warehouse. The bearded man froze, but the woman was faster, slipping through, a side door into the fog. The stocky man swung at Holmes, but Holmes dodged, landing a sharp blow to the man's jaw. He crumpled, the list falling to the floor. Watson grabbed it, his hands shaking, while Holmes untied Whitmore. Who was she? Holmes demanded, shaking. Whitmore gently. The woman, do you know her? Whitmore's eyes were wide, his voice hoarse. I don't know. They wanted names, people I've worked with. They kept asking about the committee. Holmes snatched the list from Watson, scanning it quickly. Names, dates, sums of money, a ledger of bribes or debts tied to MPs and lords. Harrington's name was there, circled in red. "We have them," Holmes said, his voice cold. "But the woman, she's the key. That brooch ties her to the lion. We need to find her before dawn." They dragged the stocky man and the bearded man outside, signaling a nearby constable. Whitmore leaned on Watson, shaken but alive. As the fog closed in, Holmes stared into the night, the list clutched in his hand. The plot was unraveling, but the woman's shadow loomed large, and the lion's roar was far from silenced. Chapter 5. Clues in the fog. The fog clung to London's docks like a shroud, muffling the lap of the Thames and the creak of moored ships. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood outside the warehouse, the cold seeping through their coats as they watched the constable haul away the stocky man and the bearded man. Charles Whitmore, bruised but alive, leaned against a crate, his breath visible in the chilly air. The list of names, now tucked safely in Holmes's pocket, was a burning weight, a map of corruption leading straight to the heart of Parliament. But the cloaked woman with the lion's head brooch had vanished, and her shadow loomed over every clue. Holmes's eyes scanned the foggy wharf, his mind racing. "She's the linchpin, Watson," he said, his voice low and sharp. "The men, we caught her pawns, useful but not the brains, that woman. Her command, her brooch, she's closer to the source of this plot." Watson nodded, his hand still gripping his revolver. "But who is she, Holmes? And where did she go? This fog hides everything." "Exactly," Holmes said, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "Which makes it the perfect time to hunt. Come, we have work to do." They helped Whitmore into a cab, instructing the driver to take him to a safe lodging under police watch. "Stay there until I contact you," Holmes told the MP, "and speak to no one, not even your closest allies." Whitmore's eyes were wide with fear. "You think there's more to come, don't you? This list, it's dangerous. Dangerous enough to kill for," Holmes replied. "Go, and stay hidden." As the cab rattled away, Holmes turned to Watson. "The lion's head brooch matches the button and the pub's name. It's a symbol, a marker of their group. We need to trace it, its origin, its meaning." They started along the docks, the fog so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes darting to the ground. The walls, the crates stacked haphazardly. "She fled through that side door," he said, pointing to a narrow alley between warehouses. "Look for signs, footprints, anything she might have dropped." Watson followed, his boots slipping on the wet cobblestones. The alley was dark, the air heavy with the smell of tar and rotting wood. Holmes knelt, his fingers brushing the ground. "Here," he said, holding up a small, muddy scrap of fabric. "Torn from a cloak, likely hers. Silk, expensive. Not common in Southwark." Watson peered at it, the faint sheen visible even in the dim light. "She's no ordinary criminal, then. Someone with money or connections." "Or both," Holmes said, pocketing the fabric. He stood, his gaze following the alley's curve. "She didn't go far. The fog is her ally, but it betrays her too. Look, there." He pointed to a faint scuff in the mud, the edge of a heel mark. Small, narrow, a woman's shoe and recent. They followed the trail, the marks leading to a narrow street lined with shuttered shops. The fog muffled their steps, making the world feel like a dream where danger lurked in every shadow. Holmes paused at a corner, his head tilted, listening. A faint clink echoed, a coin perhaps, or metal on stone. "She's close," Holmes whispered. "Stay quiet, Watson." They crept forward, the clink growing louder, joined by the soft rustle of fabric. A figure moved in the fog, barely visible, a tall shape cloaked, moving swiftly toward a darkened doorway. Holmes signaled Watson to circle around, cutting off her escape. Watson nodded, his heart pounding as he slipped along the opposite side of the street. The doorway led to a small courtyard surrounded by high walls. The woman stood in the center, her hood fallen back, revealing dark hair pinned tightly. She was rifling through a small bag, her movements frantic. Holmes stepped into the courtyard, his voice calm but firm. "Good evening, madam. I believe you dropped something at the warehouse." She spun, her eyes wide but sharp like a cornered fox. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice low and steady despite her surprise. "You're persistent. And you're elusive," Holmes replied, stepping closer. "But not invisible. That brooch on your cloak, it's distinctive. A lion's head like the one on a button we found. Care to explain?" She smiled, a cold, calculated curve of her lips. "You're chasing symbols, detective. They won't lead you far." "They've led me to you," Holmes said, his eyes locked on hers, "and to a plot against Parliament. Who are you and what's your role in this?" She laughed softly, her hand slipping into her bag. Watson, positioned behind her, saw the glint of metal, a small pistol. "Holmes!" he shouted, lunging. Forward, the woman fired, the shot cracking through the fog. But Watson's tackle sent it wild, the bullet striking a wall. Holmes was on her in an instant, wrenching the pistol from her hand and pinning her arm. She struggled, but Holmes's grip was like iron. "Enough," he said. "Your name now." She glared, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "Clara Vane," she spat, "and you're meddling in things you don't understand." "We'll see about that," Holmes said, binding her wrists with a cord from his pocket. He searched her bag, pulling out a small notebook and a key engraved with the same lion's head symbol. "This," he said, holding up the key, "will tell us more than you will." Watson caught his breath, his shoulder aching from the tackle. "She's part of it, Holmes. The list, the warehouse, she knows everything." "Not everything," Clara said, her voice bitter. "You've caught me, but the plan moves on. You can't stop it." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We'll stop it, Miss Vane, and you'll help us, willingly or not." He turned to Watson. "Find a constable. She's going to Scotland Yard with the others." Watson hurried off, returning minutes later with a constable who took Clara into custody. Her eyes burned with defiance as she was led away, but she said nothing more. Holmes examined the notebook, its pages filled with names, dates, and cryptic shorthand. "Another piece of the puzzle," he said. "But the key, this lion's head key, may unlock the heart of it." They returned to Baker Street, the fog still heavy, the city asleep. In their sitting room, Holmes spread the notebook and list on the table, his fingers tracing the shorthand. "It's a code, Watson, but simpler than the cipher. Names of MPs, lords and sums of money, bribes, blackmail, or both. And this key," he held it up, the lion's head glinting in the lamplight. "It's for something specific, a safe, a door, perhaps a box." Watson rubbed his eyes, the night's events weighing on him. "Holmes, we've got Whitmore safe, 3 of them in custody, and the list. But Clara Vane, she's not the leader, is she?" "No," Holmes said, his voice low. "She's a lieutenant, trusted but not in charge. The leader is someone higher, someone with power, like Harrington, or beyond him. The lion's head is their mark, their bond. We need to know what it opens." Holmes paced, his mind a whirlwind. "The shorthand mentions a meeting tomorrow night at a place called The Vault. No address, but it's near the Thames, likely another warehouse or cellar. We'll start there." Watson nodded, though exhaustion tugged at him. "And the key, how do we find what it fits?" "We don't," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "We let it lead us. Tomorrow we'll scour the docks again, looking for anything marked with a lion. But for now, rest, Watson. We've earned a few hours." As Watson settled into his chair, the fire casting shadows across the room, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the fog. Clara Vane's words echoed. The plan moves on. The list was theirs, but the plot was alive, and the lion's shadow stretched further than they could see. Holmes sat by the window, the key in his hand, his mind already chasing the next clue into the night. Chapter 6. The Secret Meeting. The fog had lifted slightly by morning, leaving London draped in a gray haze that dulled the city's edges. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in their Baker Street lodgings, the lion's head key and Clara Vane's notebook spread before them on the table. The fire crackled, but the room felt cold, heavy with the weight of the unfolding plot. Holmes's eyes were fixed on the notebook's shorthand, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm as he deciphered its secrets. Watson sipped his tea, his shoulder still sore from tackling Clara Vane the night before. "Holmes, have you cracked that shorthand yet? It's like reading chicken scratch." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Patience, Watson. It's a modified Gregg system, common among clerks but personalized here. I've decoded most of it. The notebook mentions a meeting tonight at the vault near the Thames, likely a cellar or hidden room. It lists 3 names. Harrington, a man called R, and someone referred to only as the Lion." "The Lion?" Watson repeated, frowning. "That's got to be their leader, don't you think? The brooch, the button, the pub, all tied to that symbol." "Precisely," Holmes said, holding up the Lion's head key. "This key is our way in. The vault is their stronghold, and tonight's meeting is our chance to catch them off guard. But we must move carefully. Clara Vane's capture will have rattled them." Watson leaned forward, his brow creased. "What about the list, those names, MPs, lords, money-changing hands? It's enough to bring down half of Parliament." Holmes nodded, his eyes dark. "Which is why they'll kill to keep it secret. The list is leverage, blackmail to control votes or silence opposition. Whitmore was a threat because he knew too much. We need to find the vault before they move, it or destroy the evidence." They set out for the Thames, the city waking around them. The docks were a maze of activity, workers hauling crates, ships creaking against the wharves, and gulls crying overhead. Holmes led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for anything marked with a lion. The key felt heavy in his pocket, a promise of answers if they could find its lock. They searched warehouses and cellars, asking dock workers and shopkeepers about the lion's head symbol. Most shook their heads, wary of questions, but one old sailor, his face weathered like driftwood, paused when Holmes showed him the key. "Seen that mark before," he muttered, spitting tobacco. "On a door down by Blackfriars, old cellar locked tight. Folks say it's haunted." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Where exactly?" The sailor pointed downriver, near the old mill, by the water. "Look for a door with a lion carved in it, but I'd steer clear if I were you." "Thank you," Holmes said, slipping him a coin. He turned to Watson. "Blackfriars. We'll go at dusk, when the meeting is likely to start." As evening fell, the Thames turned dark, its surface reflecting the city's gas lamps like scattered stars. Holmes and Watson reached the old mill, a crumbling brick building half swallowed by ivy. The air was damp, the fog creeping back to cloak the riverbank. They found the door, iron, rusted, with a faint lion's head carved into its center. The key fit perfectly, the lock clicking open with a heavy thud. Holmes pushed the door, revealing a stone staircase descending into darkness. "Quietly, Watson," he whispered, drawing a small lantern from his coat. "We're not alone." They crept down, the air growing colder, the smell of mold and earth thick. The staircase ended in a low-ceilinged cellar, its walls lined with crates and barrels. A faint light glowed at the far end, where voices murmured, low, tense, and guarded. Holmes extinguished the lantern, motioning Watson to stay close. They edged forward, hiding behind a stack of crates. In the dim light, 5 figures stood around a table, their faces shadowed. Lord Harrington was there, his silver hair unmistakable, his cane tapping nervously. Another man, tall and gaunt with a sharp nose, spoke in a clipped voice. "Clara's gone, and so are the others. Holmes is closer than we thought." "Holmes is a nuisance," a third voice said, deep and commanding. "But he's not our concern. The list is safe and the plan moves forward. The next vote is in 2 days. We strike then." Watson's heart raced. He glanced at Holmes, whose eyes were fixed on the speaker. A broad-shouldered man with a heavy coat, his face hidden by a scarf. The lion's head brooch glinted on his lapel. "The lion," Holmes mouthed, his expression grim. Harrington shifted, his voice tight. "Whitmore's alive. He'll talk if Holmes gets to him first." "Then we ensure he doesn't," the lion said. "And the list, you've secured it?" The gaunt man nodded. "Hidden where no one will find it. But we need to act fast. Holmes has the key." Watson's breath caught. They knew about The key. Holmes's hand tightened on his stick, his mind clearly racing. The lion turned, his scarf slipping slightly, revealing a strong jaw and a scar, not across his cheek, but along his neck, barely visible. Watson nudged Holmes, pointing, silently. Holmes nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We've seen enough," he whispered. "We need to get out before they spot us." They crept back toward the staircase, but a board creaked under Watson's boot. The voices stopped, and a lantern flared, its light sweeping the cellar. "Who's there?" Harrington snapped, his cane raised. Holmes grabbed Watson's arm, pulling him behind a barrel. Footsteps echoed, heavy and deliberate. The lion's voice cut through the silence. "Search the room. No one leaves." Watson's pulse pounded, his hand on his revolver. Holmes's eyes were calm, calculating. He pointed to a narrow grate in the wall, barely visible in the shadows. "There," he whispered. "Our way out." They crawled toward the grate, Holmes prying it open with his knife. The space was tight, but they squeezed through, emerging into a muddy alley beside the river. The fog swallowed them as shouts erupted from the cellar, the conspirators realizing their intruders had escaped. Holmes and Watson ran, the cold air burning their lungs. They didn't stop until they reached a quiet street, the mill far behind. Watson leaned against a wall, catching his breath. "That was too close, Holmes. They knew we were coming." "They knew someone was coming," Holmes corrected, his voice steady. "The key was a trap left for us to find, but we've gained more than they think. We saw the lion, heard their plan. The next vote is their target, and Harrington is deeper in this than he admitted." Watson frowned, wiping sweat from his brow. "And R?" The gaunt man. "Likely the same R from Whitmore's letter," Holmes said, pulling out the notebook. "He's their keeper of secrets, hiding the list. We need to find him and the list before the vote in 2 days." They returned to Baker Street, the city's fog a constant companion. Holmes spread the notebook and list on the table, his fingers tracing the shorthand. "The vault is their base, but they'll move now that we've found it. The lion is cautious but arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable." Watson sat, his mind reeling. "Holmes, this is bigger than we thought. A plot to control Parliament with lords and criminals working together. How do we stop it?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "By cutting the head off the lion, Watson. We find R, we find the list, and we expose them before the vote. Tomorrow we dig into Harrington's connections and track that scar on the lion's neck. Every clue brings us closer." As the fire died down, Watson felt the weight of their task. The secret meeting had revealed the plot's scale, but the lion was still out there, his shadow stretching across London. Holmes sat by the window, the lion's head key in his hand, his mind already chasing the next move in this deadly game. Chapter 7. Whispers of Treason. The morning sun struggled through London's persistent haze, casting a pale glow over Baker Street. Inside 221B, Sherlock Holmes sat hunched over his table, the lion's head key, Clara Vane's notebook, and the list of names spread before him like pieces of a shattered mosaic. Dr. John Watson watched his friend, the air heavy with the tension of their discoveries. The secret meeting at the vault had confirmed a plot against Parliament's next vote, and the shadowy figure known as the lion loomed large, his neck scar a fresh clue in their hunt. Holmes's fingers traced the notebook's shorthand, his eyes narrow with focus. "The lion mentioned a vote in 2 days," he said, his voice low. "It's not the trade bill that passed. This is something else, something bigger. The list names MPs and lords, tied to sums of money. Blackmail Watson to control the vote." Watson leaned forward, his tea forgotten. "But what vote? And whose are? He's got the real list, hasn't he?" Holmes nodded, holding up the lion's head key. "This was a lure, meant to draw us to the vault, but the lion underestimated us. The scar on his neck, fresh, surgical, not a street fight. He's no common thug. And R is the key to the list's hiding place. We need to find him." They set out for Westminster, the city buzzing with its usual clamor, carts rattling, vendors shouting, and the ever-present fog softening the edges. Holmes's mind was a machine, piecing together fragments. The lion's scar, Harrington's nervousness, the warning letter signed R. Watson kept pace, his revolver a comforting weight in his pocket. Holmes, if this is treason, who's behind it? Harrington's involved, but he's not the lion. Correct, Holmes said, his eyes scanning the crowded streets. Harrington is a player, not the master. The lion commands, but even he answers to someone, or something. The lion's head symbol suggests a group, organized, with reach beyond Parliament. At Westminster, the palace was alive with MPs and clerks, the air thick with whispers of the upcoming vote. Holmes led Watson to the library, a vast room of leather-bound books and hushed voices. We need records, Holmes said. Voting schedules, committee members, anything tied to Harrington or the Finance Committee. They pored over documents, Watson's eyes glazing at the endless lists of names and dates. Holmes, however, was a bloodhound, his fingers flipping pages with precision. He paused on a schedule for the next day's session, a vote on a defense bill allocating funds for naval expansion. This, he said, tapping the page, a fortune in contracts, ships, weapons, enough to tempt greedy men. Watson frowned. You think the plot's about money? Controlling the contracts? Money and power, Holmes said. This vote could shift influence, trade routes, military strength. If the Lions Group controls it, they control the government's purse. And this list, he pulled the blackmail list from his pocket. It ensures compliance. They cross-checked names. Harrington was on the Defense Committee alongside two others from the list, Sir Thomas Bradley and Mr. Edwin Lyle. Both had sums next to their names, suggesting debts or bribes. We need to watch them, Holmes said. But first, R. The letter to Whitmore warned of the lion's shadow. R knows the plot's inner workings. They left the library, heading for the Commons corridors, where MPs gathered in knots, their voices low. Holmes's eyes darted from face to face, searching for the gaunt man from the vault. Watson noticed a clerk nearby, his head down, scribbling furiously. Something about his posture, the sharp nose, the thin frame, felt familiar. Holmes, Watson whispered, nodding toward the clerk. Could that be R? Holmes studied the man, his eyes narrowing. Possibly. His hands, ink-stained, but steady. He's no ordinary clerk, let's test him. They approached, Holmes's demeanor casual but his gaze piercing. Good morning, he said, stopping beside the clerk. We're looking for records on the Defense Committee. Could you assist us? The clerk looked up, his eyes sharp and wary. Records are in the library, he said, his voice clipped. I'm busy, Holmes smiled thinly. I'm sure you are, Mr. Rivers, the clerk said, hesitating. James Rivers. Rivers, Holmes repeated, his tone light but probing. An apt name for a man near the Thames. Tell me, have you ever visited a place called the Vault? Rivers's pen froze, his knuckles whitening. I don't know what you mean, he said, but his voice wavered. Holmes leaned closer, his voice low. You do, Mr. Rivers. Or should I say R? A letter you wrote to Mr. Whitmore mentioned a lion's shadow. Care to explain? Rivers bolted, shoving past Watson and darting down the corridor. Holmes was after him like a shot, his long legs closing the gap. Watson followed, his heart pounding as they weaved through startled MPs. Rivers ducked into a side passage, his footsteps echoing. Holmes tackled him just as he reached a door, pinning him to the floor. Talk, Holmes said, his voice cold. The lion, the list, the vote, now. Rivers struggled, his face pale. You don't understand, he gasped. They'll kill me. The lion, he's everywhere. Then tell me where, Holmes said, his grip tightening. Where's the list hidden? What's the plan for the vote? Rivers' eyes darted, fear battling defiance. The list is in a safe, in the vault. The key, you have it. But the vote, it's not just money. They want chaos, a scandal to topple the government. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And the lion? Who is he? Rivers shook his head, his voice a whisper. I don't know his name. Only his scar. He meets with someone powerful. A lord. Maybe more. They call him the architect. Watson's breath caught. The architect? Another player? Holmes released Rivers but kept him pinned with his gaze. You're coming with us to Scotland Yard. You'll tell them everything or face the consequences. Rivers nodded, defeated. As they escorted him out, Watson noticed a small crowd watching, their whispers like a rising tide. Word of trouble was spreading, and the plot's shadow grew darker. Holmes handed Rivers to a constable, his mind already elsewhere. The vault again, he said. We need that safe. And this architect, he's the one pulling the strings. They returned to Blackfriars, the fog thinner but the air still heavy. The Lion's head door was locked, but the key turned smoothly, revealing the same dark staircase. The vault was empty now, its crates undisturbed, but Holmes's eyes locked. On a heavy iron safe in the corner, its lock engraved with a lion's head. He inserted the key, the mechanism clicking open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, names, dates, sums, and coded notes. The real list, Holmes said, flipping through it. Enough to ruin half of Westminster, but it's incomplete. The architect's name isn't here. Watson's stomach nodded. Rivers said they want chaos. A scandal to topple the government. How do we stop it? Holmes pocketed the ledger, his face grim. By finding the architect. The vote is tomorrow. We watch Bradley and Lyle, we follow Harrington, and we hunt for the lion's scar. Every whisper of treason brings us closer. As they left the vault, the Thames lapped quietly, the city unaware of the storm brewing. The ledger was heavy in Holmes's coat, a weapon against the plot, but the architect remained a ghost, and the whispers of treason echoed louder, threatening to drown Parliament in chaos. Chapter 8. The Locked Room. Riddle. The fog had retreated, leaving London under a cold, clear sky as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson returned to Baker Street with the ledger from the vault. The leather-bound book, heavy with names and secrets, lay on the table, its pages a map of corruption threatening Parliament's core. The vote on the defense bill was less than a day away, and the shadowy architect, the Lion, and their plan for chaos loomed larger with every passing hour. Holmes's eyes burned with focus, his fingers flipping through the ledger as Watson watched, the weight of their task pressing on them both. Holmes, Watson said, breaking the silence. This ledger, it's damning, but it's not enough. No architect, no clear plan, just names and numbers. How do we stop a vote we don't fully understand? Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. The ledger is a weapon, Watson, but a blunt one. It proves blackmail, but not the endgame. Rivers said they want chaos, a scandal to topple the government. The defense bill vote is their stage and the architect is the director. We need to find him or his next move. A sharp knock interrupted them. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face pale. Mr. Holmes, there's a policeman here. Says it's urgent. Something about Mr. Whitmore. Holmes was on his feet in an instant. Show him in. A young constable entered, his cap in hand, his face grim. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, it's bad news. Mr. Whitmore, he's dead. Found in his lodging an hour ago. Door locked from the inside, no sign of a struggle. Watson's heart sank. Dead? How? He was safe under police watch. The constable shook his head. We don't know, sir. Looks like poison. But the room was sealed. Inspector Lestrade's there now, asking for you. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind already racing. A locked room. Interesting. Watson, grab your coat. This is no accident. They hurried to Whitmore's lodging, a modest house near Westminster. The street was quiet, the gas lamps casting long shadows. Inside, Lestrade met them, his face a mix of frustration and relief. Holmes, this one's a puzzle. Whitmore's in there, dead as a doornail and not a mark on him. Door and windows locked, no one in or out. They entered the small bedroom, the air heavy with the scent of death. Whitmore lay on the bed, his face pale, his eyes staring blankly. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, its contents cloudy. Holmes knelt beside the body, his eyes scanning every detail. No wounds, he murmured. No signs of force. But this. He sniffed the glass, his nose wrinkling. Arsenic, Watson. Subtle but unmistakable. Watson frowned, his medical mind kicking in. Arsenic? That takes time to work. He was fine when we left him. Exactly, Holmes said, standing. Which means it was administered here after we left. He examined the door's lock, its bolts intact, then the windows, all securely latched. A classic locked room, yet someone got to him. Lestrade scratched his head. We questioned the neighbors. No one saw anyone enter or leave. The constable outside swears he never left his post. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Then we look closer. Watson, check the room for anything unusual. Lestrade, tell me about the constable on duty. As Lestrade recounted the guard's report, Watson searched the room. The furniture was plain, a bed, a table, a wardrobe. He checked under, the bed finding nothing but dust. Then in the wardrobe he noticed a faint scratch on the floor as if it had been moved. Holmes, he called. Over here. Holmes joined him, his fingers tracing the scratch. He pushed the wardrobe, revealing a small panel in the wall, barely noticeable. It swung open, exposing a narrow crawl space leading to the next room. Clever, Holmes said. A hidden entrance disguised by the wardrobe. Our killer came and went unseen. Lestrade's jaw dropped. But who? And how'd they get the poison to him? Holmes picked up the glass, examining it under the lamp. The water was laced after Whitmore was settled. Someone he trusted or didn't suspect brought it to him. Look. He pointed to a faint fingerprint on the glass, smudged but visible. Not Whitmore's. We'll need to compare this to our suspects. Watson's mind raced. The lion? Or the architect? Or someone closer, Holmes said, his voice low. The ledger names Bradley and Lyle both on the defense committee with Whitmore. Either could have had access, and Harrington, he's been too quiet since the vault. They searched the crawl space, finding a single clue, a torn scrap of paper with the lion's head symbol, crumpled in the dust. Holmes pocketed it, his face grim. The lion again. This was no random murder. Whitmore was silenced because he knew too much about the vote, the list, or the architect. Lestrade sighed. I'll have my men comb the house, but what's the motive, Holmes? Why kill an MP in a locked room? To send a message, Holmes said. To us and to anyone else who might talk. The architect is tying up loose ends. The vote tomorrow is their final play, and they're clearing the board. They left the lodging, the night air sharp and cold. Watson's heart was heavy. Whitmore had been a decent man, caught in a web he couldn't escape. Holmes, this is getting worse. First the cipher, now murder. How do we stop them in time? Holmes's eyes were like steel. We follow the clues, Watson. The fingerprint, the lion's head scrap, the ledger. We need to confront Bradley and Lyle and pressure Harrington. One of them will crack. They returned to Westminster, the palace looming in the moonlight. The defense committee's offices were in a quiet wing, and Holmes led the way to Sir Thomas Bradley's door. They knocked, but no answer came. The door was unlocked, and inside, the office was empty. Papers scattered, a chair overturned. Another. Disappearance? Watson asked, his stomach nodding. Holmes examined the desk, finding a half-burned note in the fireplace. He pulled it out, the edges charred but words still legible. Meet at the clock tower, midnight, the lion waits. The clock tower, Watson said, his voice tight. Big Ben? They're bold, meeting right under Parliament's nose. Bold, or desperate, Holmes said, pocketing the note. Bradley's gone, likely to that meeting. We'll be there, Watson, but first we check on Lyle. Edwin Lyle's office was nearby, and this time the door was locked. Holmes picked it with ease, revealing a tidy room. Too tidy, as if someone had cleaned it hastily. A single clue stood out. A cigar stub in the ashtray. Its scent matching. The Turkish tobacco Holmes had noted earlier. Lyle's involved, Holmes said, and he's covering his tracks. As midnight approached, they headed for the clock tower, its massive face glowing faintly through the haze. The area was quiet, the guards sparse. Holmes and Watson hid in the shadows, watching the entrance. At the stroke of 12, a figure appeared. Sir Thomas Bradley, his face pale, glancing nervously around. Another figure joined him, the lion, his scarf hiding the neck scar, his lion's head brooch glinting. They spoke in whispers, too low to hear. Holmes signaled Watson to stay put, creeping closer. But before he could overhear, a third figure emerged from the fog, Harrington, his cane tapping softly. The meeting was brief, the men dispersing quickly. Holmes returned, his face grim. They spoke of the vote and a final step. Bradley's scared, Harrington's cautious, but the lion is confident. We're running out of time. Watson gripped his revolver. What now, Holmes? We can't arrest them without proof. We don't need to arrest them, Holmes said. We need to expose them. The ledger, the fingerprint, the meeting, they're threads in a web. Tomorrow we confront Lyle and force the truth. The locked room riddle is solved, but the architect remains. We find him, we end this. As they left the clock tower, the fog closed in again, the city silent but alive with secrets. The lion was moving, the vote was hours away, and the whispers of treason grew louder, threatening to unravel everything Holmes and Watson held dear. Chapter 9. A Trail. Through Whitechapel, the night was dark, the fog creeping back to cloak London as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson left the clock tower, the echo of Big Ben's midnight chime fading behind them. The meeting they'd witnessed, Sir Thomas Bradley, Lord Harrington, and the Scarred Lion, had confirmed the plot's urgency. The defense bill vote, set for the next afternoon, was the conspirators' target, and the architect, their unseen leader, remained a shadow pulling the strings. The ledger, with its damning list of names, weighed heavy in Holmes's coat, but it wasn't enough. They needed the architect's identity, and fast. Holmes's face was grim as they walked, his mind a whirlwind of clues. The lion mentioned, "A final step, Watson," he said, his voice low. "It's not just the vote. They're planning something public, a scandal or worse, to destabilize the government. We need to find Edwin Lyle. His office was too clean, his cigar stub, a giveaway. He's hiding, and I suspect he's fled to a place where shadows thrive." Watson's brow furrowed. "Where would that be?" "He's an MP, not a street thug." "Whitechapel," Holmes said, his eyes sharp. The cigar was Turkish, rare in Westminster but common in certain dens there. Whitechapel's alleys hide men, like Lyle when they don't want to be found. We'll start at the opium houses, places where secrets are traded as freely as smoke. They hailed a cab, the horses' hooves clattering through the quiet streets. Whitechapel was a stark contrast to Westminster's grandeur, narrow alleys, crumbling tenements, and the stench of refuse mingling with the fog. The air was thick with danger, the kind that made Watson's hand hover near his revolver. Holmes, however, moved with ease, his sharp eyes scanning every doorway, every shadowed figure. They stopped at a dingy building, its sign barely legible, the Golden Lion. The name sent a chill down Watson's spine. "Another lion," he muttered. "This can't be a coincidence." "It's not," Holmes said, pushing open the door. "The symbol is their badge. Stay alert, Watson." Inside, the air was heavy with opium smoke, the room dim and crowded with slumped figures on mats. A wiry man at the counter eyed them suspiciously, his fingers twitching near a hidden blade. Holmes approached, his voice calm but commanding. "We're looking for a man, tall, thin, smokes Turkish cigars. He's been here, likely tonight." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't know him. You're not welcome here." Holmes slid a coin across the counter, his gaze unwavering. "Try again." The man pocketed the coin, his expression sour. "Saw someone like that. Left an hour ago, headed for the Red Anchor down by the docks. Didn't like his look. Too jumpy." Holmes nodded, turning to Watson. "The Red Anchor. Another den, rougher than this one. Lyle's running scared. They left the Golden Lion, the fog thicker now, swallowing the street's edges. The Red Anchor was a squat building near the Thames, its windows boarded, its door guarded by a hulking man with a scarred lip. Holmes approached, his demeanor casual. "Evening. We're here to see a friend, Mr. Lyle. He's expecting us." The guard grunted, eyeing them. "No Lyle here. Move on." Holmes's hand flashed, producing another coin. "Perhaps this will jog your memory." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. "Back room, don't cause trouble." Inside the red anchor was a haze of smoke and low voices. Men and women lounged in corners, their eyes glassy or sharp with suspicion. Holmes led Watson to the back where a curtain hid a small room. They slipped inside, finding Edwin Lyle slumped in a chair, a Turkish cigar burning in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. "Mr. Lyle," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the haze. "You've been hard to find." Lyle jumped, the cigar falling to the floor. "Holmes, how did you—" He stammered, his hand shaking. "I don't know anything, I swear." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes like steel. "You know enough to run. The ledger names you, Lyle. Bribes, debts, and a vote tomorrow that could ruin the government. Who's the architect? Where's the lion now?" Lyle's eyes widened, sweat beading on his brow. "I can't talk. They'll kill me like they did Whitmore." Watson's heart skipped. "You knew about Whitmore?" Lyle nodded, his voice a whisper. "I heard this morning. Poison in a locked room. They're cleaning house. I'm next. If I talk—" Holmes leaned in, his voice low and fierce. "You're next if you don't. Tell me about the architect, the lion's scar. Where does he meet him?" Lyle swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to the curtain. "The architect? I've never seen him. The lion handles everything. He meets someone at a house in Spitalfields tomorrow before the vote. That's all I know." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "An address, Lyle. Now." Lyle scribbled a street name on a scrap of paper, his hand trembling. "It's a big house, old, with a lion knocker. But you're walking into a trap, Holmes. They know you're coming." Holmes pocketed the paper, his face unreadable. "Let them try. Watson, we're done here. Lyle, disappear. Properly this time. If I find you again, it won't be pleasant." They left the red anchor, the fog closing around them. Watson's mind raced. "Holmes, if they know we're coming, how do we play this? Spitalfields is a warren. Easy to get lost, easier to get ambushed." Holmes's lips twitched into a grim smile. "We use their trap against them, Watson. The lion expects us, but he doesn't know we have the ledger and Lyle's address. We'll be in Spitalfields at dawn before they expect us." They returned to Baker Street, the city silent under the fog's weight. Holmes spread a map marking the Spitalfields address, a street known for its old, crumbling mansions. "The Lion Knocker," he said, his finger on the map. "Another marker. This house is their true base, not the vault. The architect may be there." Watson rubbed his eyes, exhaustion creeping in. "And if it's a trap? The lion's no fool, and this architect, he stayed hidden this long." "Then we outsmart them," Holmes said, his voice cold. "The ledger, the key, the scar, the lion's head, they're threads leading to the same web. Tomorrow we cut it apart." As Watson settled into his chair, the fire casting shadows across the room, he felt the plot's weight pressing harder. Lyle's fear, Whitmore's death, the lion's confidence, it all pointed to a reckoning. Holmes stood by the window, the Spitalfields address in his hand, his mind already mapping the trail through Whitechapel's maze. The vote was hours away, and the whispers of treason were growing into a roar. Chapter 10. The blackmailed barren dawn broke over London, the fog thinning to a ghostly veil as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson set out for Spitalfields. The address from Edwin Lyle, a crumbling mansion with a lion knocker, burned in Holmes's mind, a beacon in the web of conspiracy threatening Parliament. The defense bill vote was mere hours away, and the architect, the unseen puppet master behind the lion, remained a shadow. The ledger, safely tucked in Holmes's coat, named MPs and lords, but one name stood out: Sir Thomas Bradley, the baron who had met the lion at the clock tower. His fear and the ledger's numbers suggested he was a key player, or a pawn under pressure. Holmes's face was a mask of focus as they navigated Spitalfield's narrow streets, where ramshackle houses leaned together like conspirators. "Bradley's on the defense committee," he said, his voice low. "His name in the ledger shows a debt. £10,000 marked as paid to an unknown party. He's being blackmailed, Watson, and his meeting with the lion proves—" He's deep in this plot. Watson gripped his revolver, the morning chill biting his fingers. Blackmail for what? Votes? Or something worse? Both, Holmes said, his eyes scanning the street. The defense bill controls millions in contracts. A man like Bradley, with debts and ambition, is an easy target. If he's coerced, he'll sway the vote, or worse, spark the chaos the Lion wants. They reached the address, a tall, decayed mansion, its windows boarded, its walls streaked with grime. A heavy brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head, glinted faintly on the door. Holmes tested it, the sound echoing in the quiet street. "This is it," he said, pulling the lion's head key from his pocket. "Stay sharp, Watson. Lyle warned of a trap." The key turned smoothly, the lock clicking open. Inside, the air was damp, smelling of mold and old wood. The foyer was dark, its floor littered with dust and broken glass. A faint light flickered upstairs, accompanied by low voices. Holmes motioned Watson to follow, his steps silent as they climbed a creaking staircase. At the top, a door stood ajar, revealing a dimly lit room. Sir Thomas Bradley sat at a table, his face pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a glass of brandy. Across from him was the Lion, his neck scar visible above his scarf, his lion's head brooch catching the lamplight. A third man, tall, gray-haired with a commanding air, stood by the window, his back to the room. Holmes signaled Watson to stay hidden, his ear pressed to the door. The Lion's voice was low, menacing. "You've done your part, Bradley. The vote will go as planned. But if you waver, your debts become public, your title, your lands gone." Bradley's voice shook. "I've done everything you asked. I swayed Lyle, got the others in line. But Whitmore's death, it's too much. Holmes is sniffing around." The gray-haired man turned, his face sharp and lined, his eyes cold. "Holmes is a nuisance, nothing more. The architect has plans for him. Focus on the vote, Bradley. One misstep and your ruin is assured." Watson's heart raced. The architect, mentioned again, but not here. This man was another lieutenant, not the mastermind. Holmes's eyes gleamed, cataloging every word. He whispered to Watson, "The gray-haired man. Note his ring. A lion's head like the brooch. They're a brotherhood." Bradley stood, his chair scraping. "I want out. After the vote, I'm done." The Lion laughed, a harsh sound. "No one leaves, Baron. The architect owns you. Meet us at the river tonight, midnight. Bring the final names." Holmes pulled Watson back, retreating to the shadows as the men moved toward the door. They slipped downstairs, hiding in an alcove as Bradley and the Lion left, the gray-haired man lingering to lock the room. Holmes waited until his footsteps faded, then led Watson back upstairs, picking the lock with ease. Inside, the room was sparse. A table, chairs, and a locked cabinet. Holmes opened it, revealing a stack of letters, each sealed with a lion's head stamp. He scanned one, his face grim. "Blackmail demands," he said. "Bradley's debts, Lyle's indiscretions, others' secrets. The architect uses these to control them." Watson's stomach nodded. "They're forcing the vote, aren't they? To pass or fail the bill for their own gain." Holmes nodded, pocketing a letter. "Or to spark a scandal. If these letters go public, half the defense committee falls. The government could collapse in the chaos. We need to find Bradley before midnight." They left the mansion, the Spitalfield streets waking with vendors and workers. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the clues. Bradley's fear, the Lion's threats, the gray-haired man's ring. "The river meeting," he said. "It's our chance to catch them all. But we need Bradley to talk first." They tracked Bradley to his Westminster office, finding him alone, his face haggard. Holmes didn't knock, pushing the door open and stepping inside. "Sir Thomas," he said, his voice sharp, "your meeting in Spitalfields was illuminating. Care to explain your debts to the Lion?" Bradley jumped, his eyes wide. "Holmes, how did you—" He slumped, defeated. "You don't understand. They have everything, my letters, my accounts. If I don't obey, I'm ruined." Holmes leaned closer, his gaze piercing. "Who's the architect?" Where's the lion meeting you tonight? Bradley's hand shook. I don't know the architect's name. The lion calls the shots, but he answers to someone else. The meeting's at Wapping by the old pier, midnight. They want the final names for the vote, men who'll break under pressure. Watson stepped forward, his voice firm. You're a Baron Bradley. Why let them own you? Bradley's eyes filled with tears. Debts, Doctor. Gambling, bad investments. They offered a way out, but now I'm trapped. Whitmore tried to fight them, and look what happened. Holmes's face was stone. You're coming with us, Bradley. You'll tell Scotland Yard everything and we'll protect you. Refuse, and you'll face the lion alone. Bradley nodded, broken. They escorted him to Scotland Yard, where Lestrade took his statement, his face grim as the blackmail plot unfolded. Holmes handed over the letters, keeping one for himself. The Wapping meeting is our chance, he told Watson. The lion, the gray-haired man, maybe more. We'll be there, hidden, ready to strike. As night fell, they headed to Wapping. The Thames, a dark ribbon under the stars. The old pier was deserted, its wooden planks creaking under their steps. Holmes and Watson hid behind a stack of barrels, the lion's head letter in Holmes's hand. Midnight approached and figures emerged from the fog. The lion, his scar glinting, and the gray-haired man, his ring visible. Watson's heart pounded. Where's Bradley? He whispered. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He's late, or betrayed. Us. A third figure appeared, not Bradley but a woman, Clara Vane, released from custody, her lion's head brooch gleaming. The Baron's weak, she said to the lion. He'll talk. We need to move now. The lion nodded. The architect agrees. The vote fails tomorrow, and the letters go public. Chaos follows. Holmes signaled Watson, his voice a whisper. We've heard enough. We take them now. They sprang from hiding, Holmes tackling the lion, Watson grabbing Clara. The gray-haired man fled, vanishing into the fog. The lion fought like a cornered beast, but Holmes's strength held, binding him with cord. Clara spat curses, her eyes blazing, but Watson kept her pinned. You're done, Holmes said, his voice cold. The ledger, the letters, your meetings, we have it all. Where's the architect? The lion laughed, blood on his lip. You'll never find him. The vote's tomorrow and you're out of time. Holmes stood, the lion's brooch in his hand. We'll see about that. As they handed the prisoners to a summoned constable, Watson felt the plot's weight pressing harder. Bradley's absence, the architect's shadow, the looming vote. The blackmailed Baron was only one piece, and the game was far from over. Chapter 11. Decoding the Conspiracy. The night air bit at Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they left the Wapping pier, the lion and Clara Vane in custody, their lion's head symbols confiscated as evidence. The Thames lapped darkly, its rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in their minds. The defense bill vote was hours away, set for the afternoon in Parliament, and the architect, the mastermind behind the plot, remained a ghost. Sir Thomas Bradley's absence at the pier gnawed at Holmes, a loose thread in a tightening web of blackmail and treason. The ledger and letters, now safe with Scotland Yard, painted a damning picture, but without the architect's identity, the conspiracy could still unravel the government. Back at Baker Street, the fire cast flickering shadows as Holmes spread the seized items on the table. The lion's brooch, Clara's notebook, and the letter from the Spitalfields mansion. Watson rubbed his tired eyes, the weight of their captures heavy but incomplete. Holmes, we've got the lion and Clara, but Bradley's missing. And this architect, he's always one step ahead. What's the plan? Holmes's fingers traced, the brooch's lion's head, his eyes distant. The architect is the key, Watson. The lion and Clara are lieutenants executing orders. Bradley's absence suggests he's either fled or been silenced like Whitmore. The vote is their endgame. Chaos. Through a failed bill or a public scandal, we need to decode their final move. He opened Clara's notebook, its shorthand now familiar. The notes mention the signal, a public act during the vote. Something to expose the blackmailed MPs, likely tied to the letters we found. If those go public, the government falls in disgrace. Watson's heart sank. So they don't care if the bill passes or fails. They just want the scandal? Precisely, Holmes said, flipping to the ledger. These names, Bradley, Lyle, others, are pawns. The architect uses their secrets to control them. But there's a pattern. He pointed to a coded entry, a string of letters and numbers. This isn't shorthand, it's a cipher like the first one. A final instruction, perhaps. Holmes grabbed his cryptography books, his pen scratching as he tested keys and patterns. Watson watched, marveling at his friend's focus. Minutes turned to hours, the clock ticking toward dawn. Finally, Holmes leaned back, his eyes gleaming. It's a visionaire cipher, Watson, with lion as the keyword. The message reads, "Signal at noon. Letters to the press. Tower falls." Watson's breath caught. The press? They're going to leak the blackmail letters during the vote? Holmes nodded, his face grim. At noon, when the session is in full swing. The tower is likely Parliament itself, symbolic but clear. The scandal will erupt, MPs will resign, and the government will teeter. We need to stop those letters from reaching the newspapers. Watson frowned. But how? We don't know where they're held or who's delivering them. Holmes held up the lion's head brooch. This is our guide. The lion symbol marks their network, pubs, houses, even people. Clara's notebook mentions a printer in Fleet Street, a man named Carver. He's likely their contact for the press. They set out as dawn broke, the city stirring under a pale sky. Fleet Street was alive with the clatter of printing presses and the shouts of newsboys. Carver's shop was a narrow building, its windows smudged, a faint lion's head carved above the door. Holmes pushed inside, the air thick with ink and paper dust. A wiry man with spectacles, Carver, looked up from a press, his face tightening. "Mr. Carver," Holmes said, his voice smooth but firm. "We're here about letters you're preparing for today's papers. Letters with a lion's head seal." Carver's hands froze, his eyes darting to a stack of envelopes on his desk. "I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "Just a printer, sir." Holmes stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "You're a poor liar, Carver. Those letters are blackmail, meant to ruin MPs during the vote. Where are they, and who gave them to you?" Carver backed away, his hands raised. "I just print what I'm told. A man came last night. Tall, gray hair, wore a lion ring. Paid me to run the letters at noon." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The gray-haired man from Spitalfields. Where is he now?" Carver shook his head. "Didn't say. Left the letters and cash, that's all I know." Holmes moved swiftly, grabbing the envelopes. Each bore the lion's head seal, their contents typed. Names, debts, scandals, enough to destroy reputations. "Watson, these are the weapon. We've stopped the signal, but the gray-haired man is still out there, and Bradley's missing." Watson's mind raced. "What about the vote? It's in a few hours. If the architect knows we've got the letter, he'll pivot," Holmes said, pocketing the envelopes. "The scandal was their main play, but they'll have a backup. We need to find Bradley and the gray-haired man before noon." They left Carver's shop, the printer trembling, but unharmed. Holmes led Watson to Scotland Yard, where Lestrade was questioning the lion and Clara. "Anything from them?" Holmes asked, his voice clipped. Lestrade sighed. "Stubborn as mules. The lion won't talk and Clara just smirks. But we found Bradley, hiding in a boarding house in Camden. He's scared witless," says the gray-haired man threatened his family. Holmes's eyes lit up. "Bring him here. Now." Bradley arrived, his face ashen, his hands shaking. "Holmes, I didn't want this," he blurted. "The gray-haired man calls himself Grayson, no relation to Whitmore's clerk. He's the architect's right hand. Said if I didn't deliver, the final names my wife and son would suffer." Holmes leaned forward. "Where's Grayson now?" Bradley swallowed hard. "He's meeting someone at the Strand, near the Savoy, before the vote. A drop-off. Papers, maybe more letters." Holmes stood, his coat swirling. "Watson, we're going to the Strand. Lestrade, keep Bradley safe. The vote's at noon, and we're running out of time." The Strand was bustling, carriages and pedestrians clogging the street. Holmes and Watson scanned the crowd looking for the gray-haired man's distinctive ring. Near the Savoy Hotel they spotted him, tall, sharp-faced, slipping a package to a young boy in a cap. Holmes moved like lightning, grabbing the boy as Grayson melted into the crowd. The boy squirmed, but Holmes held firm. "Who's the package for?" he demanded. "A man at the Times," the boy said, eyes wide. "Paid me $1 to deliver it." Holmes opened the package. More letters, duplicates of the ones from Carver's shop. "A backup plan," he said, his voice grim. "Grayson's covering all bases. Watson, take these to Lestrade. I'll follow Grayson." Watson hesitated. "Alone?" "Holmes, he's dangerous." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "So am I. Go, Watson. Stop the letters. I'll find our gray-haired friend." As Watson rushed to Scotland Yard, Holmes vanished into the Strand's crowd, chasing Grayson's shadow. The vote was hours away, the letters secured, but the architect's plan was still in motion. The conspiracy was unraveling, but its heart, the architect, remained hidden, and Holmes knew the final battle was near. Chapter 12. The Watchful Eyes of Baker Street. The morning sun cut through London's thinning fog, casting sharp shadows as Dr. John Watson hurried to Scotland Yard with the blackmail letters seized from the Strand. The defense bill vote was set for noon, mere hours away, and the architect's plan to spark chaos loomed like a storm. Sherlock Holmes was somewhere in the bustling streets, chasing the gray-haired man. Grayson, the architect's right hand, whose lion's head ring marked him as a key player in the conspiracy. Watson's heart pounded, the weight of the letters in his coat a reminder of the scandal that could topple Parliament. At Scotland Yard, Inspector Lestrade met Watson, his face lined with exhaustion. "More letters?" he said, taking the package. "This plot's like a hydra. Cut off one head, 2 more grow." Watson nodded, catching his breath. "Holmes is after Grayson, the man who sent these. They're duplicates meant for the press to ruin the vote. Bradley's safe, but the architect's still out there." Lestrade locked the letters in a safe, his jaw tight. "The Lion and Clara Vane aren't talking, and Bradley's a wreck. What's Holmes planning?" "To find Grayson and force the architect's name," Watson said. "The vote's the key. If we stop their signal, we stop the chaos." Back at Baker Street, Watson waited, the clock ticking toward noon. The sitting room felt empty without Holmes, its shelves of books and chemical vials a silent testament to his restless mind. Watson paced, the ledger and Clara's notebook on the table, their secrets only half unraveled. The lion's head symbols, brooch, ring, key, tied the conspirators together, but the architect remained a ghost. Holmes burst through the door just before 11, his coat dusty, his eyes blazing. "Grayson's slippery," he said, tossing his hat onto a chair. "Led me on a chase through Covent Garden, then vanished near the Strand Theatre. But I found this." He held up a crumpled note, its edge torn, marked with a lion's head stamp. Dropped in his haste. It reads, "Signal. At noon, gallery, A." Watson's eyes widened. The gallery? The public gallery in the Commons during the vote? Holmes nodded, his face grim. "The architect plans to be there, or his agent. The signal is their final move, likely exposing the blackmail publicly in the chamber itself. We've stopped the letters to the press, but they've got another play." Watson grabbed his coat. "Then we go to the Commons now. If the architect's there, we can catch him." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "The watchful eyes of Baker Street, Watson, will be in the gallery, hidden among the crowd. But we need to move fast." They reached Westminster as the city's bells rang 11:30, the Palace of Westminster buzzing with MPs and clerks preparing for the vote. The public gallery above the House of Commons was already filling, spectators murmuring as they took their seats. Holmes and Watson slipped in, their eyes scanning every face for Grayson's gray hair or the lion's neck scar, though both were in custody. Holmes leaned close, his voice a whisper. "Look for anyone out of place. A glance, a signal, anything, tied to the lion. The architect may not show himself, but his agent will. Watson nodded, his hand near his revolver hidden under his coat. The chamber below was a sea of dark suits, MPs debating the defense bill with rising voices. Sir Thomas Bradley was there, pale but present, his eyes darting nervously. Edwin Lyle sat nearby, his face a mask of forced calm. The speaker called, for order, the vote moments away. Then Watson saw it, a man in the gallery's back row, his hand slipping into his coat. A glint of metal caught the light, a lion's head ring. "Holmes," Watson hissed, nodding toward him. "There." Holmes's eyes locked on the man, middle-aged, balding with a nervous twitch. "Not Grayson," he murmured. "Another agent. Watch his hands." The man pulled out a small packet, its edge marked with a lion's head seal. He glanced around, then leaned toward a woman beside him, whispering. She nodded, taking the packet and tucking it into her bag. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "They're passing it, likely to a reporter in the gallery. We need to intercept." They moved quietly, edging through the crowded gallery. The vote began below, voices shouting aye and nay. The woman stood, heading for the exit, her bag clutched tightly. Holmes signaled Watson to follow, his steps silent but swift. They reached her just outside the gallery, in a quiet corridor. "Madam," Holmes said, his voice polite but firm, "I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." She froze, her eyes wide. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice trembled. Holmes stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "The packet with the lion's head seal. Hand it over or we'll involve the police." Her face paled and she thrust the packet at Holmes, turning to flee. Watson grabbed her arm, holding her gently but firmly. "Who gave it to you?" he demanded. "A man," she stammered. "Paid me to deliver it to a reporter. I don't know his name. Gray hair, wore a ring." Holmes opened the packet, revealing typed pages, more blackmail letters, naming Bradley, Lyle, and others. "Another set," he said, his voice cold. "The architect's desperate, flooding every channel." The woman's eyes darted. "He said it was for justice, to expose corruption." "Corruption to hide treason," Holmes snapped. "Where's the gray-haired man now?" She shook her head. "Gone. He left before the vote started." Holmes handed the woman to a nearby constable, keeping the packet. "Watson, the vote's nearly done. We've stopped the signal here, but Grayson's still out there, and the architect's watching." They returned to the gallery, the vote concluding below. The bill passed narrowly, cheers and groans filling the chamber. But Holmes's eyes were on the crowd, searching for any sign of Grayson or another lion's head. "The architect planned for chaos," he said. "The letters were meant to erupt now, but we've delayed him. He'll strike again soon." Watson's stomach knotted. "Where, Holmes? We've got the lion, Clara, the letters. What's left?" Holmes's face was grim. "The architect himself. He's been watching, testing us. Grayson's his last shield. We find him. We find the architect." As they left the Commons, the city's bells rang noon. The vote secured, but the plot unresolved. Holmes clutched the new letters, his mind racing. The watchful eyes of Baker Street had foiled the signal, but the architect's shadow stretched further, and the conspiracy's heartbeat on, hidden in London's maze. Chapter 13. Intrigue at the Diogenes Club. The noon bells of Westminster still echoed in Dr. John Watson's ears as he and Sherlock Holmes left the House of Commons, the defense bill vote secured but the architect's plot far from defeated. The blackmail letters, intercepted in the gallery, were safely in Holmes's coat, their lion's head seals a stark reminder of the conspiracy's reach. Grayson, the gray-haired man with the lion's head ring, had slipped away again, and the architect, the mastermind orchestrating chaos, remained a shadow. With the vote passed, the conspirators' plan to spark a scandal had failed, but Holmes's grim expression told Watson the danger was far from over. Holmes strode through the bustling streets, his mind a whirlwind of clues. "The architect anticipated our move, Watson," he said, his voice sharp. "The letters were a feint meant to distract us while Grayson vanished. He's protecting someone higher, someone with access to power beyond Parliament." Watson kept pace, his hand near his revolver. "But where do we look now?" Grayson could be anywhere, and we've no lead on the architect. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Not quite. The ledger mentions a meeting place, the Diogenes Club. My brother Mycroft frequents it, and he's our best chance to uncover the architect's identity. If anyone knows the whispers of power in London, it's him, the Yao. Diogenes Club, a haven for the city's most reclusive gentlemen, stood in Pall Mall, its facade quiet but imposing. Inside, silence was law. Members sat in armchairs, reading or staring into space, forbidden to speak. Holmes led Watson to the stranger's room, the only place conversation was allowed. Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's older brother, sat by a window, his bulk filling the chair, his eyes sharp despite his placid demeanor. "Sherlock," Mycroft said, his voice low and dry, "you've stirred a hornet's nest. The Diogenes has been buzzing with rumors of your exploits. Ciphers, blackmail, a lion's head." Holmes sat, his gaze locked on his brother. "Then you know why we're here. The architect is behind a plot to destabilize the government. Grayson, a gray-haired man with a lion's head ring, is his agent. The Diogenes is mentioned in a ledger of blackmail. What do you know?" Mycroft's fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "The Diogenes is a crossroads of influence, Sherlock. Men here trade secrets like currency. I've heard of a group, a brotherhood some call it, marked by a lion's head. They're discreet, powerful, and dangerous. Your architect may be one of them." Watson leaned forward, his voice hushed. "A brotherhood here? Who are they?" Mycroft's eyes flicked to Watson, then back to Sherlock. "Names are guarded, even from me, but I've seen the lion's head, a ring, a seal, on certain members. One man, Lord Alistair Creighton, has been unusually active lately. Meetings. In private rooms, hushed talks. He's on the defense committee, and his influence reaches the cabinet." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Creighton. His name's not in the ledger, but that means nothing. Where is he now?" Mycroft glanced at his watch. "He's here in the reading room. But be careful, Sherlock. Creighton's untouchable. Friends in the Home Office, the Foreign Office, even the Palace. If he's your architect, you'll need more than letters." Holmes stood, his coat swirling. "Then we'll find it, Watson, come." They moved to the reading room, its silence oppressive, the air thick with the scent of old leather and tobacco. Lord Creighton sat alone, a tall man with a hawkish face, his gray hair neatly combed, a lion's head ring glinting on his finger. He read a newspaper, but his eyes flicked up as Holmes approached, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Holmes," Creighton said, his voice low to respect the club's rules. "Your reputation precedes you. What brings you here?" Holmes sat across from him, his gaze piercing. "A plot, Lord Creighton. Blackmail, murder, a plan to topple the government. Your ring suggests you know more than most." Creighton's smile didn't waver, but his fingers tightened on the newspaper. "A bold accusation. My ring is a family heirloom, nothing more. You've been chasing shadows, I hear. Ciphers, scarred men, letters." Holmes leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "And Grayson, your gray-haired friend. He's been busy, delivering letters to spark a scandal. Where is he now?" Creighton's eyes flickered, but he held his ground. "I know no Grayson. As for scandals, Parliament thrives on them. You're wasting your time, Holmes." Watson's hand twitched near his revolver, sensing the lie. Holmes, however, remained calm. "Then you won't mind if I search your private room here? The ledger mentions meetings, and the Diogenes is no stranger to secrets." Creighton's smile faded. "You overstep, sir. My affairs are private, and the club's rules protect me. Leave, or I'll have you removed." Holmes stood, his expression cold. "We'll see, Lord Creighton. Shadows can't hide forever." Outside, Watson's frustration boiled over. "He's lying, Holmes. That ring, his smugness, he's part of it, maybe even the architect." "Possibly," Holmes said, his eyes distant. "But he's too composed, too protected. The architect would be bolder or more hidden. Creighton's a gatekeeper like Grayson. We need to find where Grayson's gone." They returned to Baker Street, Holmes pulling out the ledger and Creighton's name, though absent, now a glaring omission. "Mycroft's right," he said. The Diogenes is their hub. Creighton's ring ties him to the lion's head, but we need proof. A meeting, a letter, Grayson himself. Watson frowned. How? The club's a fortress, and Creighton's untouchable. Holmes's lips twitched into a grim smile. Not quite. Mycroft owes me a favor. He'll watch Creighton, track his movements. Meanwhile, we search for Grayson. The notebook mentioned a safe house in Cheapside used by the Brotherhood. We'll start there. As dusk fell, they headed to Cheapside, its crowded streets a maze of shops and taverns. The safe house was a nondescript building, its door unmarked, but locked. Holmes picked it open, revealing a small room with a desk, a chair, and a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was a single letter, sealed with a lion's head, addressed to A. Holmes opened it, his eyes scanning the words. It's from Grayson, he said. Instructions to deliver a final package to the Times tonight after the vote. The architect's orders. Expose all. Let the tower fall. Watson's heart raced. Another attempt at the scandal? Holmes nodded, pocketing the letter. They're desperate now with the vote passed. But Grayson's still in London, and this safe house proves he's close. We'll stake it out tonight. They hid across the street, the city's lights flickering as night deepened. Hours passed, the cold seeping in, until a figure appeared. Grayson, his gray hair unmistakable, his lion's head ring glinting. He entered the safe house, unaware of the watchful eyes of Baker Street. Holmes signaled Watson. We take him now, quietly. He's our path to the architect. They crossed the street, hearts pounding, ready to unravel the intrigue that had spread from the Diogenes Club to the heart of London's power. The conspiracy was teetering, but the architect's shadow loomed, and time was running out. Chapter 14. The Traitor's Mask. The Cheapside street was shrouded in darkness, the gas lamps casting feeble pools of light as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson crouched in the shadows across from the safe house. The gray-haired man, Grayson, had just slipped inside, his lion's head ring a glint of betrayal in the night. The defense bill vote had passed hours ago, but the architect's plan to unleash chaos through a public scandal still pulsed, with Grayson as the key to its execution. The letter found in the safe house ordering a final package to the Times confirmed the conspiracy's desperation, and Holmes's eyes burned with the hunt's intensity. Watson's breath was visible in the cold air, his hand steady on his revolver. Holmes, if Grayson's delivering another set of letters, we can't let him reach the Times. The scandal would ruin Parliament. Holmes nodded, his gaze fixed on the safe house door. He's the architect's courier, Watson, but not the mastermind. We take him alive. He'll lead us to the architect. Quietly now. They crossed the street, their steps silent on the damp cobblestones. Holmes picked the lock with practiced ease, the door creaking open to reveal a dim room, lit by a single candle. Grayson stood at the desk, stuffing papers into a leather satchel. He froze as Holmes stepped inside, his eyes wide with panic. Mr. Grayson, Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. Your delivery to the Times is cancelled. Hand over the satchel. Grayson's hand twitched toward his pocket, but Watson's revolver clicked, stopping him cold. Don't, Watson warned, his voice steady. We know about the architect, the letters, the lion's head. Talk, and you might save yourself. Grayson's shoulders slumped, but his eyes darted, calculating. You're too late, Holmes, he said, his voice hoarse. The architect's orders are clear. The letters go out tonight, with or without me. Holmes stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Who is he? The architect. Give me his name. Grayson laughed, a bitter sound. You think I'd betray him? He's untouchable, higher than you can reach. The lion's head protects him. Holmes snatched the satchel, ripping it open. Inside were more blackmail letters, each sealed with the lion's head, naming MPs and lords with ruinous secrets. But one letter was different, addressed to A with a single line. The mask falls at midnight, St. Paul's. Watson's heart jumped. St. Paul's? Another meeting? Holmes's eyes gleamed. The final move. The architect himself, or his closest ally. Midnight's in 2 hours. We take Grayson to Scotland Yard, then head to St. Paul's. They bound Grayson's hands, his protests fading into sullen silence. At Scotland Yard, Lestrade took custody, his face grim as he locked the letters away. "This is bigger than I thought, Holmes," he said. "The Lion, Clara, now Grayson, how many are in this brotherhood?" "Enough to shake the government," Holmes replied, his voice cold. "But the architect is the head. We'll find him tonight." The city was quiet as they reached St. Paul's Cathedral, its dome looming against the starry sky. The fog had lifted, leaving the air sharp and clear. The great doors were locked, but Holmes found a side entrance, its lock yielding to his tools. Inside, the cathedral was a cavern of shadows, its vast columns rising like silent sentinels. A faint light flickered in the whispering gallery, high above the nave. Holmes led the way up the winding stairs, their footsteps muffled by centuries of stone. Watson's heart pounded, the weight of their mission heavy. "Holmes, if the architect's here, what's the mask? A code? A person?" "A disguise," Holmes whispered, pausing at the gallery's entrance. "The architect hides behind a false face, status, respectability. Tonight, it falls." They peered into the gallery, a circular balcony overlooking the cathedral's heart. 2 figures stood in the dim light, one tall, cloaked, with a lion's head brooch glinting on his chest. The other was Lord Creighton, his hawkish face tense, his lion's head ring catching the candlelight. Their voices were low, urgent. "The vote passed," Creighton said, his tone sharp. "Your letters failed. Holmes is too close." The cloaked figure, the lion freed from custody, laughed softly. "The architect planned for this. The letters were a distraction. The real strike is tomorrow, a document, forged, to implicate the Prime Minister himself. It's already in place." Watson's breath caught. Holmes signaled him to stay silent, his eyes locked on the men. Creighton paced, his voice rising. "And if Holmes finds it, he's got Grayson, the ledger, everything." "The architect trusts no one," the lion said. "Not even you, Creighton. You wear the ring, but you're expendable. Deliver the document to the Commons clerk tomorrow, or your secrets join the others." Creighton's face paled. "You'd ruin me?" The lion's scar gleamed as he leaned closer. "The architect ruins everyone who fails him." Holmes moved like a shadow, stepping into the gallery. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Your conspiracy ends tonight." The lion spun, a knife flashing in his hand, but Watson was faster, his revolver aimed. "Drop it," he snapped. Creighton froze, his hands raised, his ring glinting. "You're persistent, Holmes," the lion snarled, tossing the knife aside. "But you're chasing a ghost. The architect's beyond you." Holmes's eyes were steel. "Then tell me his name, or the document you mentioned. Where is it?" Creighton's voice trembled. "I don't know. The lion brought it. It's hidden in the Commons, ready for tomorrow." The lion laughed, his scar twisting. "You'll never find it in time. The architects won." Holmes bound their hands, his movement swift. "We'll see." He searched the lion, finding a small key, another lion's head. "This," he said, holding it up, "will lead us to your document." They escorted the men to Scotland Yard, the cathedral's silence swallowing their footsteps. Lestrade met them, his eyes wide at Creighton's presence. "A lord? This is madness, Holmes." "It's treason," Holmes said, handing over the key. "The document's in the Commons, hidden. We have until morning to find it." Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced, the new key in his hand. "The architect's playing a deep game, Watson. The document, forged to ruin the Prime Minister, is their last card. Creighton's a traitor, but not the mastermind. The lion's loyal, but even he doesn't know the architect's face. Watson's mind reeled. "So we search the Commons? It's a needle in a haystack." Holmes's lips twitched. "Not quite. The key suggests a specific hiding place, a box, a drawer marked by the lion. We'll be there at dawn before the session." As the fire burned low, Watson felt the plot's weight pressing harder. The traitor's mask was slipping, but the architect remained hidden, his document a ticking bomb. Holmes stood by the window, the lion's head key glinting, his eyes fixed on the dawn that would bring their next battle. Chapter 15. A Game of Trust and Deception. The first light of dawn crept over London, painting the city in hues of gray as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson hurried toward the Palace of Westminster. The lion's head key, taken from the lion at St. Paul's, weighed heavy in Holmes's pocket, a promise of answers to the architect's final gambit. The forged document, meant to implicate the Prime Minister and spark chaos, was hidden somewhere in the Commons, set to surface during the morning session. Lord Creighton and the lion were in custody, but the architect, the conspiracy's unseen master, remained a shadow, orchestrating a scandal that could topple the government. Holmes's face was set, his eyes sharp with focus. "The document is their last play, Watson," he said, his voice low as they navigated the quiet streets. A forgery to ruin the Prime Minister would ignite a firestorm. Resignations, inquiries, collapse. The key points to its hiding place, likely marked by the lion's head. Watson's hand rested on his revolver, the morning chill biting his fingers. But where in the Commons? It's a maze, desks, lockers, galleries. And the architect? How's he still ahead of us? Holmes's lips twitched into a grim smile. He trusts no one, not even his own. Creighton's fear, the lion's loyalty, their tools, discarded when used. The architect's strength is deception, but that's also his weakness. We'll use it against him. They reached Westminster, the palace's towers stark against the pale sky. The Commons was stirring, clerks and MPs arriving for the session. Holmes led Watson to the members' cloakroom, a warren of lockers and coat racks used by MPs. "The lion's head," he murmured, scanning the rows. "It's here, subtle but present." Watson followed, his eyes darting over brass nameplates and worn wood. Then he saw it, a locker with a faint lion's head etched into its lock, barely noticeable. "Holmes," he whispered, pointing. "There." Holmes inserted the key, the lock clicking open. Inside was a single envelope, sealed with a lion's head stamp. He opened it, revealing a typed document, a letter, forged in the Prime Minister's name, confessing to taking bribes for defense contracts. The details were precise, damning, and utterly false. Watson's breath caught. If this reached the session, it'd be the end of him. Holmes nodded, pocketing the document. "It's meant for the clerk's desk, to be read aloud today. But something's off." He examined the envelope, his fingers tracing a faint smudge. "Ink, fresh. Someone handled this recently. Someone trusted to place it." They moved to the Commons chamber, the session minutes away. MPs filled the benches, their voices a low hum of debate. Holmes's eyes scanned the room, pausing on a young clerk, nervous, his hands fidgeting with a stack of papers. "Him," Holmes said. "He's the courier. Watch his movements." Watson nodded, his heart pounding. The clerk approached the speaker's desk, slipping a paper among the day's documents. Holmes moved swiftly, intercepting him just as he turned away. "A word, sir," Holmes said, his voice calm but firm. "That paper you placed, where? Did you get it?" The clerk paled, his eyes darting. Just routine documents, sir. I don't." Holmes held up the forged letter, his gaze piercing. "This? Routine? Who gave it to you?" The clerk's shoulders slumped. "A man. Gray, hair, lion's ring. Met me last night, said it was urgent for the speaker. Paid me well." "Grayson," Watson muttered. "He's everywhere." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Where is he now?" The clerk shook his head. "Didn't say. Just told me to place it and walk away." Holmes handed the clerk to a constable, keeping the forged document. "The architect's playing a game of trust," he said to Watson. "He uses pawns like this clerk, Grayson, even Creighton, to shield himself. But each move reveals more." The session began, the speaker calling for order. Holmes and Watson slipped into the gallery, watching for any sign of Grayson or another lion's head. The chamber buzzed, unaware of the crisis averted. But Watson's unease grew. "Holmes, we've got the document, but the architect's still." Out there, what if he's here watching? Holmes's gaze swept the gallery. He is. The architect thrives on deception, hiding in plain sight. Look, there, second row. Watson followed his gaze to a man. Older, unassuming, with a plain suit but a lion's head teepin. He sat calmly, his eyes fixed on the speaker. Another. Agent? Watson whispered. Or the architect himself, Holmes said, his voice low. He's too composed, too ordinary. We need to follow him. The session droned on, the forged document safely in Holmes's pocket. As it ended, the man with the teepin rose, moving toward the exit. Holmes and Watson followed, keeping their distance through Westminster's crowded corridors. He led them to a quiet courtyard where he met another figure, Grayson, his gray, hair unmistakable, his lion's head ring glinting. Holmes signaled Watson to stay hidden, creeping closer to overhear. Grayson's voice was tense. The document didn't reach the speaker. Holmes again. The other man's voice was calm, cold. He's persistent but irrelevant. The vote passed, but our real goal is tomorrow, a new bill, foreign alliances. We control it. We control Europe. Watson's heart raced. The architect? Holmes's eyes gleamed, his hand tightening on his stick. But before they could move, Grayson glanced their way, his eyes narrowing. We're watched, he hissed, and both men bolted, splitting in opposite directions. Holmes cursed softly. Watson, after Grayson. I'll take the other. Watson ran, his boots pounding as Grayson darted through the courtyard, vanishing into a side street. Watson followed, his revolver ready, but the fog was creeping back, swallowing Grayson's figure. He reached an alley, empty save for a dropped paper, a lion's head seal, with a single word. Tomorrow. Holmes rejoined him, breathless, his quarry gone. Lost him in the crowd, he said, his voice tight. But you found something. Watson handed him the paper. Holmes's eyes darkened. Tomorrow. A new bill, foreign alliances. The architect shifted his target. The scandal was a feint, Watson. This bill is the real prize. They returned to Baker Street, the city's fog thickening. Holmes spread the ledger, letters, and new paper on the table, his mind racing. The architect plays on trust and deception, he said. Grayson, Creighton, the clerk, all pawns. This bill could shift global power, and he's positioned to control it. Watson's exhaustion battled his resolve. How do we find him, Holmes? He's always one step ahead. Holmes's lips curved into a fierce smile. By trusting no one but ourselves. Tomorrow's session is our battlefield. We watch every face, every move. The architect's mask is slipping, and we'll tear it off. As the fire burned low, Watson felt the stakes rising. The game of trust and deception was nearing its end, but the architect's shadow loomed larger, and tomorrow's vote held the key to his final betrayal. Chapter 16. The Hidden Passage. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator's cloak as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson prepared for the day's battle. The architect's plot had shifted to a new bill on foreign alliances, set for a vote in the Commons that afternoon, its outcome poised to reshape Europe's balance of power. The lion's head paper dropped by Grayson, marked with tomorrow, burned in Holmes's mind, a taunt from the unseen mastermind. The ledger, blackmail letters, and lion's head symbols pointed to a network of deception, but the architect remained a ghost, his identity hidden behind layers of pawns. Holmes stood at the Baker Street window, the dawn light gray and cold. The architect thrives on misdirection, Watson, he said, his voice sharp. The forged document was a decoy, meant to distract us from this bill. It's not just about power, it's about control, influence beyond England's borders. Watson, nursing a cup of tea, felt the weight of their task. But how do we stop him, Holmes? Grayson's gone, Creighton and the lion are locked up, and we've no clue who the architect is. Holmes turned, his eyes gleaming. We follow the lion's trail. The paper from Grayson mentioned tomorrow, but it also had a smudge, ink from a specific press. I've seen it before in the Commons archives. There's a hidden passage there, used by clerks for discreet deliveries. The architect's using it to move his pieces. They set out for Westminster, the city waking under a pale sky. The Palace of Westminster buzzed with MPs and clerks, the air thick with anticipation for the vote. Holmes led Watson to the archives, a labyrinth of dusty shelves and locked cabinets below the Commons. "The lion's head," Holmes murmured, scanning the walls. "It's here, subtle but present." Watson's eyes caught a faint carving, a lion's head, etched into a stone panel near a corner. "There," he said, pointing. Holmes pressed the panel, and it clicked, revealing a narrow passage, its air damp and stale. A faint light flickered at the far end, accompanied by the soft shuffle of footsteps. "Quietly," Holmes whispered, drawing his lantern. They crept forward, the passage twisting through the palace's foundations. The walls were old, marked, with scratches and faded initials, a secret vein of Westminster's heart. Watson's hand rested on his revolver, his heart pounding as the footsteps grew louder. The passage opened into a small chamber lit by a single candle. A man stood there, tall, gray-haired, his lion's head ring glinting as he sorted papers. "Grayson." He froze, his eyes wide as Holmes stepped into the light. "You're persistent, Holmes," he said, his voice tight. "But you're too late." Holmes's gaze was steel. "Not yet, Grayson. Your architect's plan ends here. The bill, the letters, the lion's head, what's the final move?" Grayson laughed, his hand slipping toward a knife at his belt. "You think you've won? The bill's vote is a formality. The real strike is after. Alliances shifted. Secrets sold to foreign hands. The architects already arranged it." Watson's revolver clicked, stopping Grayson's hand. "Who is he?" Watson demanded. "Give us a name." Grayson's eyes darted, fear and defiance warring. "You'll never touch him. He's in the Commons, watching, waiting. The lion's head protects him." Holmes lunged, pinning Grayson against the wall, the knife clattering to the floor. "The papers," he snapped. "Where are they?" Grayson nodded toward a leather case on the table, his face pale. Holmes opened it, revealing documents, diplomatic letters forged to suggest treasonous deals with foreign powers. "These," Holmes said, his voice cold, "would spark war, not just scandal. The architect's playing for higher stakes than we thought." They bound Grayson, his protests fading as Watson guarded him. Holmes examined the documents, his mind racing. These were meant for the vote's aftermath, to be leaked to embassies. The architect's not just toppling the government, he's reshaping alliances. Watson's stomach knotted. But who? Creighton's in custody. Bradley's broken. Who's left? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Someone in the Commons close to the vote. The lion's head ring, the papers. They point to a man of rank, trusted, invisible in his power. They dragged Grayson to Scotland Yard, handing him and the documents to Lestrade. "Secure these," Holmes said. "The vote's in an hour. We need to be in the Commons watching for the architect." The Commons chamber was a storm of voices, MPs debating the Foreign Alliances bill with fervor. Holmes and Watson slipped into the public gallery, their eyes scanning every face. The speaker called for order, the vote looming. Then Watson saw it, a man in the front row, older, unassuming, with a lion's head teepin, his hands steady as he watched the proceedings. "Holmes," Watson whispered, nodding toward him. "That's him, the man from the gallery yesterday." Holmes's gaze locked on the man, his face unreadable. Sir Reginald Vance, Foreign Office Advisor, trusted, discreet, and on every major committee, the perfect mask. They watched as Vance rose, slipping a note to a clerk who hurried toward the speaker's desk. Holmes moved like lightning, intercepting the clerk in a side corridor. "The note," he said, his voice firm. "Hand it over." The clerk hesitated, then complied, revealing a single line. "Proceed as planned. A." Holmes pocketed it, his eyes blazing. "Vance is our man, Watson. The architect." They returned to the gallery, Vance still seated, his calm a stark contrast to the chaos below. The vote began, voices shouting aye and nay. Holmes leaned close to Watson. "We can't arrest him here, not without proof." But that note ties him to the forged documents. We follow him after the vote. The bill passed narrowly, the chamber erupting in cheers and jeers. Vance rose, his movements smooth, and left the gallery. Holmes and Watson followed, keeping their distance through Westminster's maze. He led them to a quiet office, its door marked with a faint lion's head. Holmes picked the lock, revealing Vance inside, burning papers in a small grate. "Sir Reginald," Holmes said, stepping in, "your game's over. The documents, the letters, the lion's head, we have them all." Vance turned, his face calm, but his eyes cold. "You're clever, Holmes, but you're meddling in affairs beyond you. The alliances must shift. England's weak and I'm securing its future." Watson's revolver was steady. "By treason. You'd sell secrets to foreign powers." Vance smiled thinly. "For the greater good. You can't stop it. The wheels are turning." Holmes stepped closer, holding up the note. "This says otherwise. You're the architect and your empire falls now." Vance lunged for a hidden drawer, but Holmes was faster, pinning him. Watson grabbed the papers from the grate, more forged letters ready for foreign hands. "It's over," Watson said, his voice firm. They handed Vance to Lestrade, the evidence overwhelming. The Commons buzzed with whispers of scandal, but the architect's plan was broken. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat by the fire, the lion's head key in his hand. "A game of trust and deception, Watson," he said. "Vance played it well, but not well enough." Watson nodded, exhaustion settling in. "But is it truly over? The lion's head. There could be more." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "There always are. But for now the architect's mask is off, and Parliament stands." The fire crackled, the hidden passage's secrets laid bare, but Watson felt the lion's shadow lingering, a whisper of threats yet to come. Chapter 17. The Final Reckoning. The fog had settled over London once more, a fitting veil for the aftermath of the architect's downfall. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in their Baker Street lodgings, the fire casting a warm glow across the room cluttered with evidence of their triumph: the lion's head key, the ledger, the forged documents, and Sir Reginald Vance's incriminating note. The Foreign Alliances Bill had passed its true purpose, shifting Europe's power, thwarted by their capture of Vance, the architect, whose lion's head tympan now lay on the table, a trophy of their victory. Yet, as Watson gazed at the flickering flames, a nagging unease lingered. "Holmes," Watson said, breaking the silence, "we've got Vance, Grayson, Creighton, the Lion, and Clara Vane. The documents are safe, the vote secured. But it feels unfinished. The lion's head. Could there be others?" Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes distant. "A conspiracy this vast rarely ends with one man, Watson. Vance was the architect, but the lion's head is a symbol, a brotherhood. He built a network, and networks don't collapse overnight. Still, we've struck the heart. The rest will scatter for now." Watson frowned, his tea cooling untouched. "For now? You think they'll rise again?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Men of ambition always. But we've exposed their methods: blackmail, ciphers, hidden passages. They'll tread carefully, knowing Sherlock Holmes is watching." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, his face weary but triumphant. "Holmes, Watson," he said, sinking into a chair. "Vance is talking, spilling names, dates, everything. The Home Office is in an uproar, but they're grateful. You've saved the government from collapse." Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "The government's fragility is its own fault, Lestrade. What did Vance say about the Lion's Head Brotherhood?" Lestrade's brow furrowed. "Calls it the Order of the Lion. Old, secretive, with members in Parliament, the city, even abroad. Vance claims he was their leader, but I don't buy it. Too eager to take the blame, protecting someone higher." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. Vance is a master of deception, even in defeat. He's shielding the true head or heads of the order. Did he mention a foreign connection?" Lestrade nodded. "Hints of funding from the continent, Berlin, perhaps, or St. Petersburg. The forged documents were meant to weaken England's alliances, make us vulnerable. But with Vance locked up, their plan's dead. For now, Holmes murmured, echoing Watson's earlier thought. He picked up the lion's head teepin, turning it in the firelight. This symbol is their bond. We've broken their grip on Parliament, but the Order's roots run deep. Watson's mind raced, piecing together the clues they'd uncovered. The cipher, Whitmore's murder, the vault, the Diogenes Club. Holmes, what about Mycroft? He knew of the lion's head. Could he dig deeper, find the Order's other members? Holmes's smile was wry. Mycroft's already at work, Watson. He's been quietly pulling strings since our visit to the Diogenes. If anyone can unearth the Order's secrets, it's him. But we've done our part, for now. Lestrade stood, tipping his hat. You've earned a rest, both of you. Scotland, yards in your debt, though I'll never hear the end of it from my men. He chuckled, then paused. One last thing. Vance left a message for you, Holmes. Said, the lion sleeps but never dies. Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, waving Lestrade out. The door closed, leaving them in the fire's glow. Watson felt the weight of Vance's words, a chill settling despite the warmth. What did he mean, Holmes? A threat? A warning, Holmes said, setting the type-in down. The Order of the Lion is wounded, not dead. Vance knows we'll meet them again, in another form, another plot. But that's a case for another day. Watson leaned back, exhaustion catching up. So what now? We wait for the next cipher, the next scar? Holmes's gaze softened, a rare warmth breaking through. We live, Watson. We watch, we listen, and we're ready. London's full of shadows, but it's our city, and we'll keep it standing. He rose, crossing to the window, the fog swirling outside like a living thing. Watson joined him, the city's lights faint but steady through the mist. The lion's head was silenced, its architect unmasked, but the final reckoning left a truth unspoken. The game never truly ended. Holmes's hand rested on the windowsill, his eyes scanning. The streets ever watchful as Baker Street held its breath for the next shadow to stir. Chapter 18. The Lion's Resurgence. The winter chill gripped London, the fog a ghostly curtain that softened the city's edges, as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in their Baker Street lodgings. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the room where the relics of their recent triumph, the lion's head key, teapin, and ledger, rested in a locked box. Sir Reginald Vance, the architect, was behind bars, his plot to manipulate Parliament's foreign alliances bill thwarted. Yet the words of his warning, "The lion sleeps, but never dies," hung heavy, a prophecy now stirring to life with a new clue, a parcel received days ago bearing a lion's head medallion and a cryptic note signed L. The game continues. Watch the Thames. Holmes stood by the window, the medallion in his hand, its brass surface catching the lamplight. The Order of the Lion is regrouping, Watson, he said, his voice sharp with focus. Vance was a strategist, but not their true head. This L, a new lion or an old one reborn, points us to the Thames, likely a ship from Hamburg docking. Tonight, the Order's foreign ties are awakening. Watson set down his coffee, his brow furrowed. A ship. For what? Smuggling secrets, funds, or worse? And how do we know it's not another trap, like the vault? Holmes's lips twitched, into a grim smile. It's always a trap, Watson, but traps reveal as much as they conceal. The medallion's craftsmanship, German, not English, suggests a continental hand. We'll find answers at the docks, but we must move now. They donned their coats, the cold biting as they stepped into the fog. The Thames was a dark ribbon, its surface broken by the silhouettes of ships. The Hamburg steamer Königin Luisa was due at St. Catherine docks, and Holmes led the way, his eyes scanning the wharves for any sign of the lion's head. The air smelled of tar and salt, the creak of ropes mingling with the low voices of dock workers. At the docks, the Königin Luisa loomed, its gangplank guarded by a burly man with a lantern. Holmes approached, his demeanor casual, but his gaze piercing. "Good evening," he said. "We're expecting a delivery, marked with a lion's head. Where might we find it?" The guard's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on a cudgel. "No, Lyon's here, move along." Holmes slipped a coin into the man's hand, his voice low. "Try again." The guard hesitated, then jerked his head toward a warehouse nearby. "Ask for Müller. He handles special cargo." They found the warehouse, its doors ajar, a faint light spilling out. Inside, crates were stacked high, their labels in German and English. A short man with a clipped beard, Müller, stood at a table, examining a small wooden box. As Holmes and Watson approached, Müller's hand froze, his eyes darting to the box's lid where a lion's head was carved. "Mr. Müller," Holmes said, stepping into the light. "That box interests me. What's inside, and who sent it?" Müller's face paled, his accent thick but clear. "I don't know you, this is private business." Holmes's gaze was steel. "Private? Like the Order of the Lion? The medallion you wear suggests otherwise." He nodded toward Müller's neck, where a lion's head pendant glinted. Müller lunged for a hidden drawer, but Watson was faster, his revolver drawn. "Don't," Watson said, his voice steady. "Open the box." Müller complied, his hands shaking. Inside was a leather folder, sealed with a lion's head stamp. Holmes opened it, revealing papers, letters in German, detailing payments to British officials, coded messages, and a map of London marked with key locations: the Foreign Office, the Bank of England, and a house in Mayfair. Watson's heart raced. "Holmes, this is bigger than the last plot. They're targeting the entire government." Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the papers. "The Order's regrouping, funded from abroad. These payments suggest they're buying influence, not just blackmailing it. And this map..." He paused, his finger on the Mayfair address. "A meeting, placed tonight, likely where L waits." They bound Müller, leaving him for the dock police, and hurried to Mayfair, the fog thickening as the city slept. The address was a grand house, its windows dark but a faint light glowing in an upper room. A brass knocker shaped like a lion's head gleamed on the door. Holmes tested it, the sound muffled in the mist. The door was unlocked, a sign of confidence, or carelessness. Inside, the house was opulent but silent, its halls lined with portraits of stern men, some wearing lions' headpins. A staircase led to the lit room, and Holmes crept upward, Watson close behind, revolver ready. At the door they paused, hearing voices, low, urgent with a German accent. "Vance's failure cost us time," one said. "But the new plan is in motion. The payments are secure, and London will bend." Another voice, smoother, colder, replied, "Patience, Herr Klein. The lion's roar will be heard soon. Holmes is a problem, but not insurmountable." Holmes signaled Watson, then kicked. The door opened, stepping inside. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Your roar is silenced." The room held two men, one short and nervous, likely Klein, the other tall, with a commanding presence, his face half hidden by shadow but a lion's head ring glinting on his hand. "L," Holmes said, his gaze locked on the taller man. "Your medallion led us here." The man, L, smiled, unperturbed. "Mr. Holmes, you're as relentless as they say. But you're too late. The payments are made, the seeds planted. You can't stop the harvest." Watson's revolver was steady. "Who are you? The new lion or the old one reborn?" L's smile widened. "Titles matter little. I am the Order's will. Vance was a pawn, as was the lion you caught. The true head is beyond your reach." Holmes stepped closer, the folder in his hand. "These papers say otherwise. Payments, codes, maps, enough to bury your network. Where's the head of the Order?" Klein lunged for a hidden panel, but Watson fired a warning shot, the bullet splintering the wood. "Stay still," Watson snapped. L raised his hands, his calm unbroken. "You win this round, Holmes, but the Order is eternal. Arrest me, and another takes my place." Holmes bound their hands, searching L's pockets. He found a small notebook, its pages filled with ciphers and names, some familiar. From the ledger, others new. "This," Holmes said, pocketing it, "will keep us busy." They handed L and Klein to Scotland Yard, the fog swallowing their figures as Lestrade took charge. "Another lion's head?" Lestrade said, eyeing the medallion. "This never ends, does it?" "Not yet," Holmes replied, his voice cold. "But we've cut deeper this time." Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the new notebook on the table, its ciphers a fresh challenge. Watson sat, exhaustion warring with resolve. "Holmes, L said the true head's beyond us. Do we keep chasing?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Always, Watson. The lion's resurgence is a call to arms. The order's heart beats, but we'll find it no matter how deep it hides." The fog pressed against the windows. The lion's head medallion, a silent warning. The final reckoning had only begun, and Baker Street stood ready for the next shadow to rise. Chapter 19. Shadows across the Channel. The fog that blanketed London seemed to carry the weight of the Order of the Lion's resurgence, its tendrils curling around Baker Street as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat by the fire. The notebook, seized from L in the Mayfair house, lay open on the table, its ciphers a labyrinth of names, dates, and cryptic references to a network stretching beyond England's shores. The lion's head medallion, papers from the Cunning in Louisa, and the map marking London's power centers were stark reminders of the Order's ambition. The arrest of L and Herr Klein had struck a blow, but L's parting words, "The true head is beyond your reach," echoed like a challenge, pointing to a deeper mastermind. Holmes's fingers traced a cipher in the notebook, his eyes narrowed, with focus. "The Order's roots are foreign, Watson," he said, his voice low and sharp. "The ciphers mention Der Adler, the eagle, a code name, likely their true leader. References to Hamburg and Berlin suggest a German hand, and the payments we found indicate they're buying influence across Europe, not just in London." Watson leaned forward, his coffee cooling in his hand. "Der Adler? A German mastermind? Holmes, this is more than blackmail. It's a shadow war pulling strings from the continent." Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. "The Order of the Lion is a front, Watson. A tool for Der Adler to weaken England's alliances and sow discord. The Foreign Alliances Bill was a test. Their real aim is broader, targeting treaties and trade. This notebook," he tapped a page, "it mentions a meeting in Calais tomorrow night. The Order's next move." Watson's heart quickened. "Calais? We're to cross the Channel, then? It could be another trap." Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. "Trap or not, it's our lead. The meeting's at a place called Lion d'Or, another lion. We'll need Mycroft's help to arrange passage and local contacts. Der Adler may not attend, but his agents will." They sent a telegram to Mycroft, whose influence could open doors even in France, and prepared for the journey. By dawn, they were aboard a steamer bound for Dover, the Thames fading behind them. The Channel was choppy, the sky gray, but Holmes stood at the rail, the notebook in his coat, his mind already in Calais. Watson joined him, the salt air sharp. "Holmes, what if Der Adler's a myth? L could have lied to throw us off." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "No myth, Watson. The payments, the ciphers, the precision, they point to a single mind, ruthless and distant. L was loyal but expendable. Calais will reveal the next layer." They reached Calais by evening, the port a bustle of fishermen and traders under a fading sun. Le Lion d'Or was a weathered inn near the docks, its sign a roaring lion gilded, in peeling paint. Holmes and Watson took a table in the smoky common room, their English coats drawing glances from the locals. A French contact from Mycroft, a wiry man named Dubois, met them, his eyes wary but sharp. "Monsieur Holmes," Dubois said, his voice low, "the inn's a meeting place for smugglers and worse. Tonight, men from Hamburg are expected. They speak of a lion, but I know little more. Be careful, they watch strangers." Holmes nodded, slipping Dubois a coin. "Point them out when they arrive." As night fell, the inn grew crowded, the air thick with tobacco and wine. Watson's hand rested near his revolver, hidden under his coat, while Holmes's eyes scanned every face. Then Dubois signaled. A group of 3 men entered, their coats heavy, their accents German. One wore a lion's head cufflink, glinting as he ordered drinks. Holmes leaned close to Watson. "The man with the cufflink, watch him. He's their leader here." The Germans took a private room, the door closing behind them. Holmes moved swiftly, leading Watson to a narrow hall where a cracked window offered a view inside. The cufflink man, tall with a sharp jaw, spread papers on a table, his voice low but clear through the glass. "Der Adler is impatient," he said in German, which Holmes translated for Watson. "London's failure cost us, but the Paris treaty is next, funds are ready, and our man in Whitehall will deliver." Watson's breath caught. "Whitehall? Another traitor?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A mole, high-placed. The order's reach is deeper than we feared." The Germans discussed a shipment, papers, gold, destined for Paris via Calais. The cufflink man mentioned a contact, Monsieur L., arriving by midnight. Holmes signaled Watson to return to the common room, his mind racing. "Another L," he whispered. "The title passes like the lion. We wait for him." Midnight approached, the inn's noise fading. A new figure entered, short, cloaked, with a lion's head brooch pinned to his scarf. Dubois confirmed it. "Monsieur L." He joined. The Germans, the door closing again. Holmes and Watson crept back to the window, catching fragments of talk. Der Adler's orders. Paris by dawn. Whitehall's leak secured. Holmes's hand tightened on his stick. "We need those papers, Watson. They'll name the Whitehall traitor." They waited until Monsieur L. left, alone, heading toward the docks. Holmes and Watson followed, the fog rolling in from the sea. L. reached a small boat preparing to board, when Holmes struck, tackling him silently. Watson grabbed the man's satchel, finding papers inside, codes, names, and a letter signed Der Adler, ordering the disruption of the Paris Treaty. Monsieur L. struggled, his eyes blazing. "You're fools," he spat in accented English. "Der Adler sees all. Whitehall will fall, then Paris." Holmes bound him, his voice cold. "Who's the Whitehall contact?" L. laughed, blood on his lip. "You'll know soon enough. The lion's claws are sharp." They handed L. to Dubois, who promised to hold him for French authorities, and took the papers to their lodging. Holmes spread them out, decoding a cipher that named a Whitehall official, Sir Henry Marlowe, a senior diplomat. "Marlowe," Holmes said, his voice grim. "Trusted, close to the Foreign Secretary, the order's mole." Watson's stomach nodded. "Back to London, then? To catch Marlowe before he leaks more?" Holmes nodded, pocketing the papers. "By the first steamer. The Paris Treaty's at risk and Marlowe's the key. Der Adler's shadows stretch across the channel, but we'll cut them down." They boarded a dawn steamer, the Calais fog fading behind them. Holmes stood at the rail, the lion's head brooch in his hand, his eyes fixed on England's coast. Watson joined him, the papers heavy in his coat. The order of the lion's resurgence was a storm gathering, its claws reaching from Berlin to Whitehall. The hunt for Der Adler had begun, and Baker Street's light burned bright against the shadows. Chapter 20. The Mole in Whitehall. The steamer from Calais cut through the channel's choppy waters, its engines a low hum as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood at the rail, the dawn light painting the horizon in streaks of gold. The papers, seized from Monsieur L. in Calais, weighed heavy in Holmes's coat. Coded messages, a letter from Der Adler, and the damning name of Sir Henry Marlowe, a senior Whitehall diplomat revealed as the Order of the Lion's Mole. The Paris Treaty, a fragile pact to stabilize Europe's alliances, was at risk, and Marlowe's betrayal could tip the continent into chaos. The lion's head brooch from Monsieur L. glinted in Holmes's hand, a symbol of a conspiracy that refused to die. Holmes's eyes were fixed on the approaching Dover cliffs, his voice sharp despite the sea's roar. "Marlowe's position gives him access to every diplomatic cable, Watson. If he's leaking to the order, they'll know our every move. We must catch him before he delivers to Der Adler's agents." Watson gripped the rail, the cold salt air stinging his face. But, how, Holmes? Marlowe's a knight, trusted by the Foreign Secretary. We can't just barge into Whitehall and accuse him. Holmes's lips curved into a grim smile. We won't accuse, Watson, we'll trap. The papers mention a drop tonight at a tavern called the Crown and Anchor in Westminster. Marlowe's delivering documents to an order contact. We'll be there, watching. They reached London by mid-morning, the city cloaked in a thin fog that mirrored the tension in their minds. At Baker Street, Holmes spread the Calais papers on the table, decoding the remaining ciphers with furious precision. One revealed a time, 9 o'clock, and a code phrase, "The lion hunts at dusk." Watson's heart quickened as he checked. His revolver, the weight of their mission pressing harder. Mycroft must be informed, Holmes said, scribbling a note. His influence in Whitehall can keep Marlowe in place until we strike, but we'll need Lestrade's men to seal the net. They met Lestrade at Scotland Yard, the inspector's face etched with disbelief as Holmes outlined Marlowe's treachery. A diplomat, Lestrade said, shaking his head. This order's got its claws everywhere. I'll have men at the tavern, but you're sure it's Marlowe? Holmes handed him the decoded cipher. Certain. The lion's head marks him. B. Discreet, Lestrade. No uniforms, no noise until we have him. As evening fell, the fog thickened, swallowing Westminster's gas lamps in a hazy glow. The Crown and Anchor was a respectable tavern, its clientele a mix of clerks and MPs, its air thick with cigar smoke and murmured deals. Holmes and Watson took a corner table, their faces half hidden by hats and scarves. Holmes's eyes scanned, the room sharp as a hawk's, while Watson's hand rested near his revolver. At 9 sharp, Sir Henry Marlowe entered, his silver hair and polished demeanor at odds with the tavern's rough edges. He carried a slim briefcase, his eyes darting as he took a seat near the bar. A man joined him, lean, with a German accent and a lion's head cufflink glinting on his sleeve. Watson's pulse quickened. That's the contact, he whispered. Holmes nodded, his gaze locked on the pair. Marlowe slid the briefcase across the table, murmuring, "The lion hunts at dusk." The German nodded, opening it to reveal papers, diplomatic cables, treaty drafts marked with Whitehall's seal. Holmes signaled Lestrade, who waited outside with plainclothes officers. But before they could move, the German's eyes flicked toward their table, his hand slipping into his coat. "Holmes!" Watson hissed, drawing his revolver as the German pulled a knife. The tavern erupted, patrons scattering as Holmes lunged, knocking the knife away. Watson tackled Marlowe, pinning him to the floor as the briefcase skidded across the room. Lestrade's men stormed in, seizing the German, whose cufflink gleamed defiantly. Marlowe struggled, his face pale but composed. "You don't understand," he spat. "This is bigger than England." Holmes retrieved the briefcase, his voice cold. "Big enough to betray your country, Sir Henry? These cables would have gutted the Paris Treaty. Who's Der Adler?" Marlowe's eyes burned with defiance. "You'll never reach him. The order's claws are in every capital. I was saving England, making it strong." Watson's grip tightened. "By selling secrets? You're a traitor." Lestrade cuffed Marlowe, his face grim. "He'll talk, Holmes, or rot in the tower. What about the German?" Holmes searched the man, finding a coded note signed Der Adler. "Another courier," he said, pocketing it. "But this note mentions Vienna, a summit next week. The order's next target." They escorted Marlowe and the German to Scotland Yard, the fog swallowing their figures. Back at Baker Street, Holmes decoded the note, revealing plans to disrupt the Vienna summit, where new trade agreements would be signed. "Der Adler's moving fast," he said, spreading a map of Europe. Marlowe was a key piece, but the order's network is vast. Watson sat, exhaustion warring with resolve. "Vienna, then? We're chasing shadows across the continent now." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Not shadows, Watson, clues. The lion's head, the ciphers, the payments, they lead to Der Adler. Marlowe's fall weakens him, but he'll strike again, we'll be ready." The fire crackled, the lion's head cufflink on the table a silent challenge. Watson felt the weight of their pursuit, a mole unmasked but a mastermind still free. Holmes stood by the window, the fog pressing close, his mind already crossing the channel to Vienna, where the order's claws waited, sharp and unseen. Chapter 21. The Vienna Gambit. The train rattled through the Austrian countryside, its rhythm a counterpoint to the tension gripping Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they journeyed to Vienna. The fog of London had given way to crisp, alpine air, but the shadow of the Order of the Lion followed, its claws reaching for the Vienna summit where European powers would forge new trade agreements. The coded note from Sir Henry Marlowe's German contact seized at the Crown and Anchor had revealed the Order's next target. A plot to sabotage the summit, orchestrated by the elusive Der Adler. The Lion's head cufflink now locked in, Holmes's case was a stark reminder of the stakes. Holmes sat by the train window, the note cipher spread before him, his eyes tracing its lines. Der Adler's plan is bold, Watson, he said, his voice low over the train's clatter. The summit's agreements will shape trade for a decade. If the Order plants false documents or sparks a diplomatic row, alliances could fracture. Exactly what Der Adler wants. Watson, polishing his revolver, frowned. But how, Holmes? Marlowe's in custody and we've got their papers. What's left for them to play? Holmes's fingers tapped the cipher. A new agent, Watson. The note mentions Der Falk, the Falcon, a lieutenant in Vienna, likely posing as a diplomat or aide. The Lion's head marks him, and he'll move during the summit's opening tomorrow. They reached Vienna by dusk, the city's spires glowing under a fading sun. The summit was hosted at the Hofburg Palace, its grandeur a stark contrast to the conspiracy brewing within. Mycroft had arranged credentials through British contacts, posing Holmes and Watson as trade advisors. At their hotel, a message from Mycroft awaited. Austrian intelligence reports unusual activity. German and Russian agents spotted. Lion's head seen on a delegate. Tread carefully. Holmes pocketed the message, his eyes gleaming. The Order's reach is vast, Watson. Der Falk's here and we'll find him. The Hofburg's ballroom buzzed with diplomats the next morning, chandeliers casting light on silk gowns and tailored suits. Holmes and Watson mingled, their eyes scanning, for the Lion's head. Watson's heart pounded, his hand brushing the revolver hidden under his coat. Too many faces, he muttered. How do we spot one man? Holmes's gaze was sharp. Look for the outlier. Too calm, too watchful. The Lion's head will betray him. They moved through the crowd, eavesdropping on snippets of French, German, and Russian. Near a marble pillar, a man caught Holmes's eye, lean with a hawkish face, his type in a subtle lion's head. He spoke to a Russian delegate, his voice low, his eyes scanning the room. That's him, Holmes whispered. Der Falke. They followed him to a side chamber, where he met a woman, tall, with a lion's head brooch on her shawl. Holmes signaled Watson to stay back, creeping closer to overhear. The documents are ready, the woman said in German. Place them in the British envoy's portfolio tonight. Der Adler expects chaos by morning. Der Falke nodded, his typin glinting. The British will be blamed, and the summit will collapse. Where's the drop? Schönbrunn, the orangery. Midnight, she replied, slipping him a key. Holmes retreated, his mind racing. They're planting forgeries to frame Britain, Watson. We need those documents before the drop. They spent the day shadowing Der Falk, who moved between delegates with practiced ease, his lion's head deep in a silent taunt. As night fell, they headed to Schönbrunn Palace, its gardens dark and quiet. The orangery, a glass-walled structure, glowed faintly, its air thick with citrus and damp earth. Holmes picked the lock and they slipped inside, hiding among the trees. At midnight, Der Falk arrived, the woman close behind. He carried a leather case, setting it on a table. Holmes, signaled Watson, and they sprang, Holmes tackling Der Falke, Watson grabbing the woman. The case fell, spilling papers, forged letters implicating the British envoy in a bribe to Russia. You're too late, Holmes. Der Falke spat, struggling. Der Adler's plan is in motion. Holmes bound his hands, his voice cold. Not yet. These forgeries won't reach the summit. He searched the woman, finding a coded note signed Der Adler. Frame the envoy, break the treaty. Vienna is the spark. Watson's revolver was steady. Who's Der Adler? Where is... Hey, the woman laughed, her brooch glinting. Beyond you, Englishman. The lion's roar echoes far. They handed the pair to Austrian police, Mycroft's contacts ensuring swift action. The forgeries were secured, and the summit proceeded, unaware of the crisis averted. Back at their hotel, Holmes decoded the note, revealing a name. Baron von Stetten, a German industrialist with ties to Berlin's elite. Not Der Adler, Holmes said, but close. A financier funding the order's moves. Watson's exhaustion battled his resolve. Berlin next, then, to chase von Stetten? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. Soon, Watson. The Vienna Gambit's won, but Der Adler's watching. The lion's head leads us closer and we'll follow its trail. The city slept, its spires dark against the starry sky. Watson clutched the lion's head teepin, the order's shadow stretching from Vienna to Berlin. Holmes stood by the window, the coded note in his hand, his mind already crossing borders to the next battle in their relentless hunt.